It begins in front of a tall electrical box marked with danger and electric shock warnings. The young man grips several exposed wires, his mind racing with the thought that if he were caught now, everything would end for him. At that moment, two men seize him as he struggles to break free, trying to avoid being dragged back. In that instant, he understands clearly that being captured there would mean the end of everything. With no hesitation, he chooses a desperate move. The protagonist forces the cables together, triggering a powerful short circuit. He accepts the cost of that decision, preferring to sacrifice himself rather than be taken again. A violent surge of energy erupts. All three are struck by the electric discharge, and even in that moment, the boy accepts the outcome without regret. But none of it truly matters. Inside his chest, a heart of resurrection continues to beat. Even with his body severely damaged, the young man rises again, holding on to the certainty that he will never truly disappear. This marks the beginning of the story of Resurrection Boy and the secret hidden within that strange organ. In this world, many different types of hearts exist, each carrying its own unique trait. This rare mutation affects only a small portion of people, granting them unusual abilities. Depending on the nature of the organ, a person can display powers that go far beyond normal human limits. Because of this, such individuals become known as heart mutants. Many people envy them, calling it a divine gift, but the truth is far from that. Hearing such ideas, the protagonist feels a bitter urge to laugh as he digs through a trash can. Looking at his own miserable condition, he blames that very power for the hardship of his life. Right now, survival matters more than anything. Hunger pushes him to the edge. While searching, he finds a discarded piece of bread and feels a sudden rush of joy at his luck. Even surrounded by filth, he eats quickly and without hesitation, convincing himself the food does not even smell bad. As he eats, a dog approaches him while he crouches beside the trash. Noticing the animal, he assumes it must be hungry as well and offers it a portion. The dog accepts and begins licking the young man's thin skeletal hand. Then, without warning, several more dogs appear and surround him. A strange sound reaches his ears. Fear takes hold, and he quickly hides behind a nearby wall, carefully peeking out as he wonders if those from the lab have found him. But what he sees is different. 3 street delinquents are gathered ahead, cornering a defenseless student. Realizing the situation, the protagonist relaxes slightly, understanding they are nothing more than local troublemakers. The group continues harassing the girl, acting as if she should already understand how the world works. From his position, the young man notices that she is holding a bag of pet food, which explains why she is there. Seeing the unfairness of it all, he decides to step in. He begins walking toward them. His presence draws their attention, and they turn toward him with confusion, questioning who this ragged figure is. The protagonist moves closer to one of them, making it clear that he is not just some homeless nobody. The bully is horrified when he sees the skeleton's face up close and begins screaming in fear. At that moment, the hero's arm turns into a very sharp bone blade. With the weapon in hand, he orders the delinquent to stay quiet and get out of there as quickly as possible. With that, the bullies run off in terror, shouting that they saw a ghost while the girl watches. The student, still lying on the ground, tries to stammer out a thank you for the unexpected help, but the skeleton turns toward her and points his finger in a very frightening way. The girl panics and shouts for the creature not to come any closer, telling it to stay far away, but he simply ignores her fear and picks up the bag of pet food that fell to the ground during the commotion. The student is completely confused by the strange creature's actions. Then she tells him that the pet food he took was meant for the street dogs. The skeleton eats a little and apologizes, saying he did not want to frighten the young woman. He then politely asks if he can have a little of the food, leaving the young woman in shock. Terrified when she sees that the thing can talk, the girl screams and runs far away from there. The young man watches the scene, already expecting that reaction because he is used to it, but he is not bothered and says that at least now he can eat the pet food in peace. Even though she is scared, the student remains hidden, watching and wondering what that thing was. She begins to question whether it was a person and whether it is possible for someone to live in that condition. With that, a possibility comes to the young woman's mind, and she wonders if he is a heart mutant. The girl remembers that mutants have bizarre abilities and that he saved her from the thugs. Feeling guilty for her reaction, she decides to return and approaches the skeleton again. Then, the young woman offers a sandwich from her backpack to the starving young man. Surprised and touched, the survivor asks if that sandwich is really for him. The girl confirms it and apologizes for running away earlier, and he thanks her as he takes the food. He holds the sandwich and thinks that this is the first time he has received food that looks like that. The boy takes a huge bite and remembers that he had only seen wrappers of that sandwich in the trash. As soon as he tastes the sandwich, he is overwhelmed and says the flavor is simply heavenly. He praises how fresh the vegetables, bread, and meat are and says he could die happy. Looking at the student petting the dogs, the protagonist thinks that she is an angel. After a while, the student gathers the courage and asks what she should call the skeleton. He then says that his name is Geo Kim and formally introduces himself to the young woman. With a smile, the girl says it is a pleasure and reveals that her name is Song Heiji. Then she asks how the young man ended up like that, and he explains that he is running from the lab. Frightened, Heiji asks about this lab and whether he is really being chased. Geo confirms it, saying that there is a research center that captures mutants and that they are trying to take him back. The student is shocked because she has heard rumors and asks what they would do to him in that place. The skeleton pauses and prepares to reveal the truth about his dark past. He explains that he was used in experiments and suffered for 10 years through tests and procedures. Heiji is horrified to learn about the cruelty he endured for an entire decade. Geo explains that all of this happened because of his resurrection heart, which regenerates him. Because of that unique ability, he survived everything, and that is why he ended up in that state. The girl looks at him with a serious and determined expression after hearing the painful story. The young man continues to lament his appearance and the suffering his power has brought him. Suddenly, the student stands up and invites him to go somewhere with her. Geo is confused when the young woman grabs his hand and pulls him along, saying it will be quick. He is completely stunned as he feels her hand holding his tightly. Even with his frightening appearance, a girl had the courage to hold his hand. With a flushed face, the skeleton feels awkward and thinks that she caught him off guard. Unexpectedly, his bone blade appears again while he is being pulled down the street. Halfway there, the young man's hand comes off, and the student panics as she ends up holding the limb. With that, the girl falls into despair, and he tries to calm her down, saying that this happens from time to time. The skeleton explains that he only needs to line it up for the arm to attach again and asks where they are going. Moments later, the young man appears wearing new clothes and a wig. Not fully understanding the situation, Heiji explains that she bought the clothes so he could disguise himself and avoid drawing attention. The girl says they are simple items but should work well enough for a while. Geo is touched by the gesture and says he really likes the new clothes he received from the young woman. The young man feels very comfortable and says it feels like he has new skin. He becomes very excited, but the student warns that the change is not complete yet. The girl points out that his face is still visible and says she will cover it with makeup. With that, the young woman finishes and reveals his new look, now with glasses and everything. Heiji feels slightly embarrassed, but Geo likes it, and she says that now no one will recognize him. While the girl hides her face in embarrassment, her phone suddenly starts ringing. She checks the time and realizes she is late for class. With that, the student says goodbye and leaves, leaving Geo alone with the dogs. As she runs off, she shouts for him to take care of the little dogs while she is gone. He stands there, thinking about the name of the girl who helped him that day. That angel's name was Song Heiji, and he would never forget it. The dogs gather around him, and he wonders if her request means she will return the next day. Then, the young man remembers that in the lab, everyone treated him like an experiment. He recalls that there, he was nothing more than an animal, and on the streets, people only ran from him in fear. But Heiji was the first person in a long time to treat him like a real human. Lying down with the dogs, he thanks the small dog that led him to meet her. Then, the young man asks the animal what he should call it while receiving a few licks. He suggests the name Potato, and the little dog seems to like it and barks happily. Repeating the new name, he remembers how good the sandwich he received was. Geo thinks that the young woman who gave him clothes and spoke to him is a true angel. Because of that, he looks forward to the next day and hopes to see her again. But suddenly, the protagonist stops smiling and faces reality. He calls that thought foolish and realizes he cannot put the girl in danger. The young man remembers that he is being hunted and that his presence could bring harm to her. With a heavy heart, the skeleton decides that the best choice is to leave. He feels that he must return to where he belongs and stay away from kind people. So, the young man begins walking alone through the dark streets of the city with no clear destination. After wandering for a long time, he finds a sewer entrance near a river. Without hesitation, he enters the place to hide from everyone. He eventually collapses on the dirty ground and remains unconscious for a long time. When he wakes up, the young man is startled to see that he is holding a rat by its tail. He gets up and thinks that he cannot just sleep anywhere, since he passed out from exhaustion. Soon after, hunger hits, and the protagonist feels his stomach growl loudly. The young man had expected this, so he saves some pet food before leaving. He decides to eat it while imagining the taste of the sandwich to trick himself. With that, he eats each piece as if it were part of a real meal and is surprised by the result. Suddenly, the protagonist hears a strange noise and becomes alert inside his hiding place. At that moment, the dog Potato jumps on him and snatches the food from his hand, leaving him desperate. He scolds the animal, saying the little dog should not eat that. But something feels off, and the skeleton becomes confused by the situation. Then, the young man realizes it is Potato and is shocked that it is there. He cannot understand how the dog managed to find him in such a distant place. Soon, the young man realizes that if the small dog is there, it means someone else must have come with it. At that moment, he hears Haiji's voice and is grateful that his skull face hides his joy. The student appears with a serious look and asks why he left without telling her. She says she almost could not find him, and that her happiness at seeing him again is clear. The girl explains that she followed the scent of the dogs, which is how she found the hideout. With that, she scolds him for putting himself in danger, and he apologizes for making her worry. The young man then admits that he was afraid of being a burden and chose to leave. With a smile, the young woman says she is very happy to have finally found him. She adds that even Potato was worried, and the little dog licks his face. Then the girl says they need to eat and shows several snacks she brought. Haiji explains that she bought all of it because he had only eaten one sandwich the day before. The student prepares a dessert by mixing milk with cookies and offers it to him. He is surprised by the mix, but the young woman assures him it tastes good. The young man feels a new sensation and thinks that yesterday's food was already amazing. With that, he tries the dessert with a small spoon and wonders about the taste. The flavor is so good that he begins to cry with emotion and says it is delicious. He gets so excited that he offers some to her, but she tells him to try the soda. Suddenly, as he drinks it, his arm starts to regenerate quickly. The student is shocked by what she sees, and he shows his arm healing right in front of her. His hand is still forming, and the girl watches closely, clearly frightened. She then asks if the healing is always this slow and if it will take days for him to recover. The young man corrects her, saying that at that speed, a full recovery would take years, leaving her stunned. He thinks that to speed it up, he would need to absorb a large amount of a certain liquid, but decides not to scare her. So, the young man changes the topic and says, "This is the method using food," and she asks what the other method is. The skeleton lies and says the other way only works in the lab and that eating already helps. The girl asks if the lab used to help him, and he explains that they would heal him for experiments. Because of that, they continue to chase him no matter where he hides. Hearing this, the student understands that this is why he ran away without saying anything. He confirms and says she does not need to be kind anymore, since being close to him is dangerous. The girl stands up, determined, and says they need to go to the police station right away. But the young man says the police would treat him like a monster and that he was almost targeted before. The girl tells him not to worry and reveals that her older sister works as a police officer. With that, she shares an important secret, saying that her sister also has a mutant heart, just like him. The skeleton is completely shocked and asks if he heard correctly that her relative is a mutant. At that moment, the young man stays silent, thinking about the unexpected information while looking down. The student then asks him to trust her, assuring him that the officer is a kind person. But the survivor still seems to be processing everything, his expression showing confusion. Seeing that the mood has become heavy, the girl decides to say goodbye to the animals and says she needs to leave early. Then she gives the little animals one last pet and says that the shelter should contact them soon. Little Potato makes a funny face and barks happily as if he understands the human's whole conversation. Alone with the animal, the protagonist thanks him for his help and pets the head of his new best friend. With a determined look, the young man tells himself that this time he will not run away like a coward. He smiles and promises the little dog that he will come back soon to visit and play again in that place. From afar, the student waves goodbye as the young man watches her walk away and disappear into the city horizon. Pulling up his hood, the young man thinks that after 3 years on the run, someone has finally reached out a hand to help him. He remembers his friend's smile and feels that having someone by his side is a very strange and new feeling. Walking down the street, the hero wonders if he can finally live in peace without having to remain a fugitive forever. But suddenly, Bright lights hit his face, and he stops in the middle of the road. With the violent impact, the skeleton's body is thrown far away, and his glasses fly off as he spins through the air. At that moment, the young man crashes hard onto the asphalt and lies on the ground without any sign of reaction. A huge henchman grabs the student and covers her mouth as she tries to scream for her friend. With that, several men in suits run toward the protagonist, and one of them is holding a baseball bat. At that moment, two henchmen take the chance and lift the young man's body while he is still dazed. In the background, a lighter is sparked, and a small flame lights up the scene, revealing a new figure. A scarred man lights a cigarette and says that he has finally found that pathetic scrap. The leader then orders them to take him, because he will pay for everything he put them through during the chase. The three black cars speed away, taking the captured protagonist to an unknown place, but through the rearview mirror, the skeleton can be seen being dragged by a rope around his neck. The young man gasps as he is dragged across the asphalt, and it becomes clear that two other bodies are being pulled along with him. With a face full of anger, the young man curses himself for being captured in such a humiliating way. He needs to stop them at any cost, so he starts digging his hands into the ground to try to slow the car. The protagonist screams that all of this is his fault, and his expression shows deep despair. He blames himself because even High G was dragged into this mess, and now she is trapped inside the car. The friction against the asphalt is tearing apart his hands, but the young man refuses to stop fighting. The young man gasps and keeps being dragged down the road, but he still resists with all his strength. He feels powerless and realizes that with his useless ability, he cannot do anything to save them. Hopeless, the young man begins to beg for help, asking someone to please save him from this nightmare. Unexpectedly, several dogs appear out of nowhere and begin jumping toward the kidnappers' cars. The little dogs, including Potato, bite the rope hard, and the protagonist is shocked by their loyalty. With that, the animals unite and pull the young man's body back, trying to slow the vehicle and save him. With the combined strength of the animals, the rope finally breaks, and the young man is left behind on the asphalt. Noticing this, the driver brakes hard, making the tires skid across the road. The car comes to a full stop, and the protagonist lies on the ground, surrounded by his four-legged companions. The dogs bark and growl, protecting the young man's injured body as he lies badly hurt. Inside the vehicle, one of the kidnappers gets angry and curses when he sees the animals ruining everything. With that, the men in suits step out of the car and prepare to face the pack of furious dogs. One of the henchmen mocks them, asking if the mutts have gone crazy as they keep growling. The skeleton on the ground starts losing consciousness and tries to shout for his friends to stop. Losing patience, the attackers begin striking the small dogs with baseball bats without mercy. With great effort, the young man tries to stand, unable to watch the animals fight for him. He clenches his fist and focuses, knowing he has to do something to help them. At that moment, one of the dogs bites a man's leg with force, even while injured. The protagonist gets an idea and remembers that he needs a certain liquid to regenerate faster. He decides to absorb the fluid spilled on the ground to recover part of his body. With that, he drags himself with difficulty toward a puddle of the liquid on the asphalt. Suddenly, he looks to the side and sees Potato's body lying still on the ground. The young man's face fills with horror, and his eyes widen at the tragic scene. In shock, he calls out his friend's name, unable to accept that the little dog is gone. He looks around and sees the bodies of the other dogs, all lying lifeless. He calls their names, but the scene is filled only with silence and despair. At that moment, he remembers the 10 years he spent trapped in that lab. He lived in chains and endured countless cruel experiments at the hands of the scientists. Every day they gave him a red substance and took parts from his body in a nightmare he could not escape. The routine never changed, and because of his power, he could not even choose when it would end. Until one day, he planned an escape and, by chance, managed to get out. He believed he would finally be free and happy after leaving that nightmare behind. But reality proved different, as people outside looked at him with fear and disgust. Everyone treated him like a monster. Because of that, he ended up living alone in the trash, feeling like he did not belong anywhere. But something inside him begins to pulse with a strange and powerful energy. Then, the protagonist remembers the dogs and the student, the only ones who showed him kindness. They treated him like a human being, and that awakens something hidden within him. With that, all the spilled liquid on the ground starts moving toward him quickly. The red substance wraps around his body, and a dark energy spreads across the area. He absorbs all of the fluid, and his body begins to regenerate at an incredible rate. His muscles and skin form again, and he feels stronger than ever. The liquid gathers around his arm, forming a dense and resistant layer. At that moment, a new power awakens, and his regeneration reaches an unbelievable level. With the power of the absorbed fluid, his hand fully regenerates in an instant. A deep red energy begins to surround his body. Then his face also restores, and his eyes glow with an intense red light. His body returns to normal, and he regains the human form he once had. He looks at his own hand, surprised, and realizes that his physique is completely different. The young man understands that he is no longer a skeleton, and that everything has returned to how it was before. He remembers his childhood, when his unique nature already made him incredibly strong. But suddenly he realizes something terrible about the source of that power. The liquid that healed him came from the small dogs who died trying to protect him. The henchmen are terrified by what they see and ask their leader what they should do. The boss ignores their fear and moves forward with a knife, trying to capture him. But the hero is faster. He throws a powerful punch straight into the attacker's face. The impact is so strong that it sends the man flying backward with incredible force. The henchman crashes into the side of the car, denting the metal, and ends up stuck in the door, completely knocked out by the blow. With the path open, the young man picks up Little Potato's body and holds it with care. Crouching on the ground, he hugs his canine friend and grieves the loss of his companion. With a dark look, he says that he knows the most painful way for a person to die. The other aggressors are terrified, and he promises something horrible to whoever answers first. The scene shifts to an isolated warehouse, which seems to be the secret base of some very dangerous and cruel men. Several black cars are parked in the yard, showing that the place is full of armed and watchful henchmen. Suddenly, someone pulls a dark bag off the head of a person being held hostage there. Song Heiji looks around in despair, asking who these people are as she tries to understand her situation. At that moment, the young woman realizes she is in a very sinister place, and her face fills with real fear. Several delinquents surround the student, smiling in a twisted way, as if they are enjoying her panic. With that, the girl wonders where she is and why she was brought to this hideout in the middle of nowhere. She looks to the side and sees a horrible sight, with strange people handling biological samples, leaving her in total shock. But soon, one of the men grabs the young woman's hair roughly and tells her to stop making so much noise. The group's leader walks closer and asks if she happens to have several extra lives to be screaming like that. Then the villain shows a photo of the skeleton and says she is only there because she helped that mutant. He tells the young woman to keep her mouth shut if she wants to make it through this once it is over. With a cruel look, the man says that nobody would care if 1 or 2 people disappeared from that place today. The student freezes as she stares into the kidnapper's cold eyes, realizing he is not joking at all. Unexpectedly, a cell phone starts ringing inside the leader's jacket pocket, breaking the tense moment. The man answers the call and asks why his subordinate is calling instead of showing up with the target. On the other end of the line, the henchman talks about the dogs, and the villain becomes confused. Without understanding what happened, the subordinate reports that the bone monster turned into a human and that the animals were behind it all. At that, the boss grows furious and demands that the man speak clearly so he can understand the situation. Haiji overhears the conversation and wonders if the little dogs really showed up to save her friend at that moment. The boss asks over the phone if the subordinate is saying they lost the skeleton. At that, he loses control and yells that the target was very valuable and that the henchman is useless trash. Then the man kicks something in anger and threatens his men if they fail to capture him again. Furious, he turns to the girl and asks where her friend has gone right now. The villain yells that she needs to tell him everything at once and complains that he lost a lot of money because of the escape. Terrified, the student says she knows nothing, and the kidnapper laughs mockingly. At that moment, he pulls out a blade and threatens to hurt her to see if her memory comes back. The young woman remembers that her friend warned her about being followed, but she acted carelessly and ignored it. With the blade close to her face, she thinks about what she should do to escape that dangerous situation. Just then, the aggressor prepares to strike, but something unexpected happens inside. Suddenly, one of the henchmen is thrown violently into another, and both collapse on the ground unconscious. The other delinquents turn around, startled, and prepare for whatever has just entered the place. At the entrance, the protagonist appears in human form, surrounded by a strong and dark aura of vengeance. The leader turns toward the door and is completely confused when he sees the mysterious figure standing there. The young man's face is hidden in shadows, and the villain asks who that strange boy is. At that moment, One of the men approaches him and calls him a beggar because of his torn and dirty clothes. But the hero grabs the man's neck with incredible speed and begins to squeeze with great force. The delinquent struggles to breathe and wonders what kind of strength the young man now possesses. With a cold expression, the protagonist says that because of them, something terrible has happened. Then he reveals that, because of them, all the little dogs were lost that night. The leader shouts for his men to deal with the intruder, and two of them rush forward to attack. One of the men throws a strong punch directly at the hero's face, but he does not even react and keeps a calm and terrifying expression. Then the young man strikes back with an even stronger punch that lands directly on the attacker's chin. The impact is so powerful that the delinquent is sent flying, and the protagonist keeps advancing. Suddenly, another henchman grabs him from behind and shouts that he has finally restrained him. Soon another joins in, and both of them hold the young man while pulling his hair with force. Even while being restrained, his eyes glow with a deep red light, and he appears stronger than before. He uses the momentum and throws one of the men over his shoulder with overwhelming strength. The boss and the others are left completely shocked by the young man's display of power. The hero slowly stands up and looks down, his face filled with intense hatred. With glowing eyes, he asks if they were sent by the Hermes laboratory to capture him. The student watches in disbelief, her expression changing completely as she sees what is happening. Then she realizes that the boy is Gio and is stunned by his new human form. The boss understands everything as well and yells that the boy was the skeleton all along. He remembers the warning that he might not recognize him if he fully regenerated. Suddenly, the leader pulls out a weapon and shoots the protagonist in the back, and the young man feels the impact. The villain thanks him for coming back on his own and points the weapon at the young man's injured body. With that, he orders his men to grab all the weapons they received as payment for the job. The henchmen obey, and they all begin firing at the hero without any mercy. The boss yells that they will make a lot of money if they capture him and tells his men to keep firing without stopping. With that, the young man is struck by several shots, and the villain orders them to fire until he can no longer regenerate. The bullets keep hitting the young man's body, which is completely pierced by the projectiles. He feels terrible pain, and red liquid runs across his face and torn clothes. The protagonist thinks about how his flesh is being ripped apart by the bullets passing through him. His bones are also being broken by the endless rain of shots. He feels that his lungs have been pierced, and because of that, he cannot even breathe properly. Seeing the scene, the student falls into despair and screams for them to stop their cruelty. After so many shots, the hero's body finally falls to the ground, and the men celebrate his collapse. The young man lies there, covered in wounds, and it seems that he has finally been defeated by them. But suddenly, his hand begins to move, and he touches the pool of red liquid around him. With that, the red liquid on the floor starts being absorbed back into the young man's body. The red liquid from the defeated henchman on the ground flows toward the protagonist to heal him. At that moment, his heart of resurrection glows intensely and pulses with an absurd amount of energy. One of the henchmen notices what is happening and shouts desperately to the boss, warning him about the danger. The man yells that the target is coming back to life, and the young man's body begins to rise on its own. The group's leader is terrified and says that he is getting up like a zombie. The red liquid moves around his body and starts healing all the wounds from the shots. Desperate, the villain orders the men to fire again and asks if they are just going to stand there watching. He feels each bullet entering his body, but this time his expression is very different. Even while taking shots to the head, he thinks about how the bullets are tearing him apart completely. But even with so many injuries, his body keeps recovering in a bizarre way. But the young man realizes that the pain is not as strong as he first thought it would be. This is because he has gone through much worse things in his dark past. He then remembers when he was a child and endured every kind of torment inside the laboratory. The boy was crushed by giant presses and used in cruel and inhuman tests again and again. Because of that, the protagonist states that the experiments in that place were far more painful. Back in the present, he lands a powerful punch on the face of one of the nearby delinquents. The blow is so strong that the man is thrown far away with incredible force. With a hateful glare, the hero says that something like firearms means nothing to him now. He claims he can take this all day, and the aggressor is left with a badly bruised face. The other henchmen are terrified as they watch the young man move with superhuman ability. Then the protagonist strikes another henchman with a devastating, fast, and precise blow. The man tries to defend himself, but the force is too great, and he feels the impact directly. At that moment, the delinquent is sent flying and crashes into a metal tank. The hero thinks about what is driving him to madness. What angers him the most is remembering the little dogs who sacrifice themselves trying to protect him. Then he unleashes his fury and begins attacking all his enemies with overwhelming and deadly speed. The image of little Potato smiling appears in his mind, fueling his rage even more. He continues fighting, thinking about how he failed to protect his only true friends. Seeing the chaos, the boss grabs the student and tries to escape, shouting for the young man not to come any closer. With that, he threatens to shoot the student if the young man advances. But the hero ignores the threat and lands a devastating punch directly on the kidnapper's face. The blow connects cleanly, and the villain feels the full force of the brutal impact. With a face filled with hatred, the young man shows he will show no mercy. He says that he will never see his friends again, and throws the villain away with a final punch. The man's body is launched and crashes into a metal tank, denting it from the impact. The leader lies there, his face completely bruised after the beating. He looks at the protagonist in deep fear and realizes the danger he is in. Terrified, the aggressor begs to be spared and promises to do anything, but the young man stares at him with cold eyes and says it is too late for forgiveness. He then delivers a powerful kick to the villain's head, who screams in pain from the hit. The impact is so strong that the ground cracks, and the man tastes blood in his mouth. The hero continues, landing another punch with all his strength on the enemy's face. Without stopping, he unleashes a series of fast and brutal blows on the kidnapper's body. The speed is so high that the man cannot react in time to defend himself. After the assault, the villain's face is completely disfigured, and the young man observes the result without emotion. Red liquid drips from the protagonist's injured hand after so many strikes. He stands over the defeated body of the boss, who no longer moves on the dirty floor. The scene pulls back, revealing all the henchmen down, and the warehouse in total chaos. The young man takes a deep breath, and vapor leaves his mouth, showing that the fight is finally over. With the battle finished, the student calls his name, her voice slightly shaken but relieved. The young man begins walking toward her, his bare feet touching the dirty warehouse floor. He keeps moving closer, and the girl watches him with concern on her face. He stops in front of her as she remains seated on the ground, looking at him without knowing what to say. The young woman asks if he is okay, remembering that he was shot many times before falling. Suddenly, the hero drops to his knees and hugs her tightly, surprising her with the sudden action. With tears in his eyes, the young man feels relief, knowing that his friend is safe. Haiji says she is glad he is alive, and hugs him back in that moment. He then admits in a sad voice that the dogs died to save him from that cowardly attack. The young man says he was terrified that she might get hurt in the middle of all that chaos too. Because of that, he repeats that he is so glad she is alive, and the hug becomes even tighter. Confused, the girl wonders why he is thanking her in such a painful and strange moment. With her hand on his chest, she can feel how shaken her friend is by everything that happened. The student says she should be the one thanking him for saving her life in that place. At the scene, the police arrive, and the detective shouts for the officers to take the suspects to the station immediately. At that moment, one of the henchmen who survived the fight is handcuffed by an officer as he lowers his head in defeat. The warehouse is full of criminals, and the investigators wonder how so much destruction happened in an internal conflict. From a distance, the pair watches the police cars move, and the girl wonders if they should not be investigated too. But the young woman explains that her sister told them to stay away because things become complicated when mutants are involved. So they decide to leave and let the older woman handle the whole mess beneath the full moon. Unexpectedly, the student starts crying loudly because of the tragedy she has just seen. The young man cannot hold it back either, and begins to sob while hiding his face in his hands, overwhelmed by deep sadness. He looks at the little dogs lying on the ground and apologizes for not being able to protect his small friends. The hero remembers the name of each animal who gave their lives for him and feels a huge emptiness in his heart. With that, the young woman hugs one of the pets and says it is all her fault, since the little animals only wanted to save her from the bad guys. She regrets not taking better care of them and cries, thinking that those brief moments of affection had become everything to the dogs. At that, the protagonist bites his own finger hard and says, "It is not her fault, because the animals died for him." The student is shocked and asks what her friend is doing when she sees the wound he made on himself, but the young man explains that he can heal with blood and wonders if his special fluid could bring his friends back. With a determined look, he lets the red liquid drip onto the animal's body, hoping for a miracle. The young man focuses all his will on that strange plan, hoping his mutant nature can do the impossible. Even in pain, he keeps injuring his own hand and wonders why the regeneration is happening so quickly now. He bites even harder as the red liquid flows, and the hero seems to completely ignore the physical pain he is feeling. Seeing his sacrifice, his friend grabs his arm and asks him to stop, saying the little dogs would be even sadder to see that. With a sad face, he wonders if the dogs do not hate him for dying because of him. But his friend holds his hand and explains how much the little animals truly loved him. She says that at first they were very skittish and did not like people, but with him it was different. The young man is surprised and wonders if they really were wary of all humans. The young woman confirms it, saying they had many scars from abuse and bad memories. While petting one of the pets, he admits he had no idea because he thought they were simply gentle. Because of that, the girl asks him not to blame himself, since that would hurt their hearts too. The protagonist remains there with one of the animals on his lap, thinking about everything he has heard. With a smile, the young woman says that the fact they approached him so easily probably means they sensed that their friend was in a situation similar to theirs. The young man then thanks her for the comforting words, and the two stay silent for a moment. Suddenly, a soft whimper catches their attention, and they look toward the sound. At that moment, Potato's puppy appears, and the student is very relieved to see that he survived. Without understanding, they watch the little dog slowly walk toward them in the clearing. The puppy stops right in front of the young man and wags its tail while staring at him. With that, the hero asks if the little one does not hate him, since its family was lost because of him. In response, the small animal licks the young man's hand, as if saying everything is fine. The young man is moved by the scene, and his friend comments that it seems the puppy really likes him. Suddenly, the little dog falls asleep in the hero's arms, and she says he must be very tired. The student then thinks about what to do and considers taking the newborn home with her. The young woman also thinks about what to do with her friend and the puppy, since the people from the lab are not normal. With that, she asks him to wait for a moment and runs off to call her sister for help. On the phone, the young woman explains the situation and asks where they should go now that everything is over. After the call, the two walk through the city, and the young man carefully holds the little puppy. They soon arrive at a large apartment building that appears to be the home of the student and her family. Upon entering, the young man looks around, and his friend tells him to come in and feel at home, but he hesitates at the door, wondering if it is right for someone as dangerous as him to enter her house. The student smiles and says he risked his life to protect her, so there is no reason to be afraid. She also reveals that her sister wants to meet him, because he might be able to help with a case involving the lab. With that, the young woman convinces him to step inside, and the protagonist finally accepts her invitation. At that moment, he sees his reflection in a window and becomes confused by what he sees. Suddenly, the hero panics and is frightened by his own appearance, surprising the girl with his reaction. He grabs her shoulders and says that his face is back, with cheeks, a nose, and even lips. The young man explains that he did not realize it before, since his face had not regenerated since his childhood in the lab. With his hands against the glass, he looks at himself and understands that he is finally seeing his true appearance. Shocked by the story, the young woman drinks some water and says something has been bothering her for a while. She then asks his age, because now that he is regenerated, he does not look old at all. The young man becomes thoughtful and says it has been so long that he never even thought about his age. He remembers entering the lab at 7 years old and escaping 3 years after several yearly tests. After doing the calculation, the young man says he is 17 years old, and his friend spits out her water in surprise. The girl is shocked and asks why he let her call him sir if they are the same age. With a shy expression, the young man explains that he was just happy she treated him like a human being. The student is left speechless after hearing such a sincere and sad answer. At that moment, she thinks the situation is a bit pitiful, but at the same time finds his attitude very endearing. So the young woman suggests they call each other by their names and invites him to eat after taking a shower. Meanwhile, the little puppy takes the chance to devour its bowl of food with great excitement. At the table, the protagonist, now wearing clean clothes, prepares for his first proper meal. With wide eyes, he tastes the food and says that everything is warm and delicious. His friend feels embarrassed and says it is just a simple dish, apologizing for not being a good cook. But the young man insists, saying that this is the best food he has ever eaten in his entire life. The young woman then explains that her sister had something unexpected come up and will not be able to meet them today as planned. With the plates completely empty, it is clear how hungry the young man was and how much he enjoyed the dinner. Because of that, she points to the couch and says he can sleep there tonight to rest. She hands him a blanket and he feels a bit awkward, but thanks her for the hospitality. With a smile, the student says goodbye and mentions she is going to her room to do her homework. The bedroom door closes and the young man is left alone in the living room for the first time. Holding the blanket, he looks around, still adjusting to his new reality. His eyes take in every detail of the house, and he is amazed by how normal everything feels. The hero is surprised when he sees the television and wonders how it can be so large and thin. Looking at the flowers in a vase, he thinks about how different this place is from the cold and lifeless laboratory. He lies down on the couch and is surprised by how comfortable it is, much softer than the bed he had in the lab. Meanwhile, the little dog drinks some water but ends up throwing up a bit of the food he ate earlier. The puppy seems very sick, and the protagonist turns around, startled by the scene. At that moment, the hero realizes something is wrong and looks at his little friend with a shocked expression. The small animal keeps vomiting and appears weak and fragile. Desperate, the young man calls out the puppy's name, his face full of worry. With that, he runs toward the puppy, trying to help during that tense moment. The young man stops in front of him, but the little one just looks back with a confused expression, not understanding what is happening. Suddenly, the puppy seems completely fine and simply tilts its head to the side. The hero then realizes it was nothing serious and feels relieved, thinking it was just a false alarm. Later, the two lie down on the couch, and the puppy snuggles close to him in a very cute way. With the puppy resting on his shoulder, he thinks about how warm and comfortable this place is for sleeping peacefully. Smiling, the young man asks his new companion if he is also enjoying their new safe home. Then he starts thinking of a name, and since the father was Potato, he suggests the name French Fry. The hero decides to call him Fry, and the little one seems to like the name as he gets patted. With that, he finally understands what happiness is and falls asleep feeling warmth in his heart. His memories of that day pass through his mind, and he remembers the meal he had earlier. He also recalls the warm shower he was able to take for the first time in a long time. The memory of washing with warm water fills him with happiness and gratitude for that peaceful moment. And finally, he remembers that he can now sleep peacefully in a comfortable place like this. While sleeping quietly, he has a nightmare and realizes how fragile happiness can be. With a sad smile, he reflects that all of this can be taken away very easily. He then remembers escaping from the lab with other mutants who were running in desperation. Back then, he and his companions ran toward the exit, hoping to finally be free. But the guards of the facility appear and say they cannot lose those valuable mutants. Suddenly, an explosion happens, and two of the fugitives are thrown away with brutal force. The hallway floor breaks, and the young people fall into the rubble with no way to escape. One of the soldiers gets ready and points an energy weapon toward the mutants on the ground. The tip of the weapon glows with intense light, preparing to fire a devastating attack. But the shot is deflected and hits the guards themselves, who are caught off guard by the attack. The other soldiers are completely shocked by what just happened in front of them. At that moment, a girl with black hair uses her ice powers to attack the enemies. On the floor, the protagonist seems to be in shock, and the young woman yells for him to snap out of it. Meanwhile, one of the boys uses his powers to hold the floor together, stopping everyone from falling. With a determined look, he does everything he can to protect his friends from that deadly trap. The skeleton then looks ahead with renewed determination and finally gets ready to act. The girl reaches out her hand to him and yells for them to hurry since the exit was very close. The young man then takes his friend's hand, and the two prepare to continue their desperate escape. He remembers how hard they ran, but in the end, they ended up getting separated. Back in the present, the young man opens his eyes, and the nightmare finally comes to its sad end. Lying in bed, he thinks about his friends from the lab and wonders if they are suffering somewhere. Because of that, he swears he will not let anyone take away the small peace he has now found. His scars glow faintly, and he strengthens his promise to protect his new friend at all costs. With that, his mutant heart pulses strongly, and he decides to fight for this new happiness. With a serious look, the young man warns that if anyone tries to ruin his moment of peace and quiet, he will not let it pass and will do whatever it takes to get revenge on whoever dares to do it. The next day, a desperate scream echoes through the city, catching the attention of everyone nearby. Someone is running quickly through the streets, and their hurried footsteps show that something very serious has happened. At that moment, the protagonist is seen running and shouting the name of his little puppy. Fry. With tears in his eyes, the young man yells in despair and asks where his only friend has gone. The student announces that she is leaving for school, and the young man becomes curious when he hears such an unfamiliar word. At that moment, the girl explains that her sister only returns at night and asks him to take good care of the house during the day. Then the young woman says goodbye, and the hero thinks that this school thing must be a lot of fun. Suddenly, she notices that little French Fry is whimpering and scratching the wall with great excitement. With that, the two watch the little animal's strange behavior as he keeps making noise in the corner. Curious, the student asks if the pet wants to go outside, and the young man notices that the animal does not seem sick, only bored. So the protagonist decides that he is going to take his little companion out for a walk on the street right away. Even so, his friend becomes concerned and asks if the dangerous men are not still after him out there. With a smile, the young man says, "Everything is fine because no one will recognize his new human face." Relieved, the young woman agrees and feels calmer, believing the hero is safe now. At that moment, the girl points to the drawer where the leash is and gives him the door code so he can go out. Once outside, the young man struggles to control the little animal, who starts jumping and barking non-stop in the street. With great difficulty, he tries to hold the pet and realizes that walking a dog is not simple at all. Watching little Fry struggle, he wonders if the collar is making his friend uncomfortable. The hero grows worried when he hears the animal whining and becomes afraid that he tightened the leash too much. At that moment, he covers his face and remembers when he was held in heavy chains. In a flashback, the boy recalls the suffering in the lab, where he received painful shocks while restrained. Because of that trauma, he starts thinking that others might not like the animal and gets lost in thought. Then the protagonist lets go of the leash and apologizes to the little one, who disappears instantly from sight. Suddenly, the young man is in total shock and realizes that little French Fry has run away in the street. The hero shouts the animal's name in desperation as he runs through the streets, hoping to find him quickly. Tears fall from his face as he wonders where his only companion has gone. The journey of the resurrected boy continues, now with the disappearance of the pet that changed his world. He runs past several people on the sidewalk and begs for the pet to answer his call. At that moment, the young man starts searching through trash cans and looking into every dark corner, his heart beating fast. He kneels to check under abandoned debris but finds only a few frightened mice. Desperate, the young man looks behind a large dumpster and keeps searching through the unfamiliar neighborhood. Soon he sits on the ground and begins to cry, wondering how he will find the puppy in such a big place. Lost in his thoughts, he imagines the worst and is terrified by the idea of the pet being hit by a truck. His fear grows even more when he thinks that cruel people might capture and hurt his little friend. The young man cries deeply and blames himself for losing the pet just one day after promising to protect him. Suddenly, he stops in an alley and sees a building in the distance that looks like the school his friend mentioned earlier. Looking toward the field, he sees some students playing and finally spots the little dog hidden among the bushes. Little Fry calmly licks his paw in the middle of the plants, unaware of the worry he caused. The protagonist immediately runs at full speed toward the bushes, wondering if the pet followed the girl's scent. Unexpectedly, a man passing by becomes confused and looks to the side, trying to understand what is happening. The young man rushes past him so fast that the man tries to grab him, but cannot even touch his clothes. The instructor is left in shock, wondering how someone can move that quickly as he watches the blur pass by. The hero continues his desperate run, and the man calls out for him to stop, but his only focus is rescuing his pet. Meanwhile, the students continue their soccer game, unaware that a powerful mutant has entered the area. The courtyard remains lively and calm, with students enjoying themselves. In the bleachers, some sit and chat casually about daily topics. Hidden behind a tree, the hero observes the place carefully to avoid being noticed. At that moment, he focuses on a specific group, paying attention to their conversation. Soon, the students begin talking about the origin of mutants and whether the rumors about the lab are real. One of the boys shows on his phone that the reward for capturing a mutant can reach up to 1 billion won. Hearing that amount, the protagonist realizes how people outside see his kind only as a product. With that, the young man decides he needs to find the puppy quickly and leave before something bad happens. Meanwhile, little Fry runs happily across the courtyard, unaware of the danger surrounding him. In another part of the school, some girls are recording a dance challenge to post on their social media with great excitement. After finishing the video, they check the result and praise each other's looks while laughing and smiling. Then the group's leader looks at her phone, very proud of the outcome, while her friends keep giving exaggerated compliments. Suddenly, the little animal appears, running toward them and surprising the girls with its cute presence. Charmed, they pick up the pet and begin showering it with affection because it is so small and adorable. With that, the students decide to take a picture with their new friend to post on their stories and gain many views that afternoon. But when they look at the photo, they notice a dark figure standing right behind them and scream in fear. Terrified, the young women accuse the hero of being a strange stalker who was secretly taking pictures of them. Embarrassed, the young man steps out from behind the tree and apologizes, explaining that he was only searching for his pet. With a shy expression, he says he did not mean to scare anyone and just wants his puppy back. At that moment, the girls' attitude changes, and they begin to blush when they realize that the puppy's owner is actually very handsome. Then they look at his clothes and assume he must be a new student, since they have never seen him before. The young man asks if he interrupted their recording, and the group's leader asks if he wants to appear in the video as well. The other girls giggle and say he is very cute, but the hero insists that he cannot be in any videos. Ignoring that, the girl holds out her phone and asks for his social media so they can follow each other. Holding the puppy, she says she will tag him in the post while her friends watch closely. The girls whisper among themselves that it is the first time she has asked for someone's contact and comment on how handsome he looks. At that moment, the hero becomes confused, not understanding what a photo app is, and they mention that her account is very popular there. With a sly look, the young woman thinks the new boy is attractive, and that his shy behavior makes him even more interesting. But the protagonist steps back and admits that he does not have any kind of social media, leaving the girls surprised. The group's leader freezes and wonders if she heard him correctly. Then the young man bows and thanks her for the invitation, but says he must refuse and apologizes for the trouble. Her friends are shocked and comment that they cannot believe the most popular girl in school was just rejected. With that, the young woman becomes angry and thinks the hero is pretending, as it seems impossible for someone not to want her contact. Suddenly, the young man takes Little Fry back and says he is taking the pet home, while the student burns with anger inside. He hugs the puppy and apologizes for letting him get lost, promising it will not happen again. But in the distance, a red-haired delinquent watches everything and is filled with rage at the scene unfolding in the courtyard. The bully's friends are also watching and wonder who that strange guy talking to their boss's girlfriend is. With that, one of the boys asks if that is not his girl, and the guy confirms it with a very dark and heavy stare. The hero keeps petting the little animal, not realizing that the group of troublemakers is watching his every move. The villain grits his teeth in fury and thinks the protagonist is flirting with his girlfriend right in front of him. Because of that, the delinquent asks one of his friends for the ball, and the boy does not understand why he suddenly wants it. But the bully ignores him and prepares to kick with all his strength while his friend shouts in panic at the scene. The kick is so strong that the ball bends from the absurd force of the blow. With that, the object flies toward the target, and the aggressor says he does not care at all about the consequences. Then the ball heads straight for the protagonist, who is holding Little Fry, and he is caught off guard by the sudden attack. But instead of dodging, he stops the object with his face and stares at the enemy with a very cold and threatening look. His serious expression shows that he will not let that cowardly and unprovoked attack pass. With that, the little puppy stays completely safe in its owner's arms as he bravely shields it from the hit. The impact is so strong that it throws dust into the air, but the hero does not even move from where he stands, and the girls are shocked by the scene. Just then, one of the students approaches with concern and asks if he is okay after taking that ball to the face. But suddenly, red liquid starts dripping onto the ground, and the young woman screams in fear when she sees his injury. The aggressor walks over, pretending to care, and says it was an accident because he did not mean to hit anyone with the ball. With a fake smile, he apologizes for the mistake, and his girlfriend asks if the young man was badly hurt by the hit. Then the bully tells the young man to be more careful next time, and the hero only stares at him in silence for a moment. With blood running from his nose, the protagonist says the puppy almost got hurt and demands a proper apology. The delinquent starts laughing loudly and points at the hero's nose, which is now bleeding non-stop from both sides. But he quickly stops when he remembers his girlfriend is watching and that he needs to keep his good boy image in front of her. So he changes his tone and asks if the young man is okay, suggesting that he go to the nurse's office as soon as possible. But the young man repeats that the pet is what matters and that the aggressor should be more careful the next time he kicks the ball. He then says everything is fine because the other guy already apologized, and the bully is left completely confused by that calm response. So the hero leaves, and one of the bullies comments that he took the kick well, but the boss tells him to shut up. Angrily, the leader orders his henchmen to find out who the new guy is because he has developed a deadly hatred for that young man. Walking down the street, the young man thinks about the scare he went through, but feels happy for having found his puppy. He also smiles because, thanks to the pet, he got to see a school and watch people his age having fun. With a smile, the young man wonders if he would have made many friends if he had studied in a place like that. Suddenly, the aggressor from before calls him friend, and the hero turns around, confused by the approach. Then the bully puts his arm around him and apologizes for what happened earlier with the ball. The redhead says they are in the same grade now, so they are friends, leaving the protagonist confused. At that moment, the aggressor offers to buy him a snack as an apology, and the young man does not understand what he means. But when he hears the word bread, his eyes light up, as he has never eaten something like that before. He asks if he is serious, and the bully leads him away, saying he knows a place nearby with delicious bread. Then the young man asks if there will be something for Fry to eat, and the aggressor promises to buy whatever he wants. The redhead thinks the young man must have been hungry after trying to act cool in front of the girls earlier. Suddenly, the bully stretches his foot in front of him, trying to trip him. The young man falls hard to the ground while the aggressor watches with a cruel expression. On the ground, he notices other guys and realizes he has fallen into a trap while trying to protect the little animal. One of the henchmen mocks him for believing the free snack story so easily. The others laugh and wonder if the new guy is foolish for trusting such a lie. The boss says he will give him a knuckle sandwich, and several other beaten students can be seen nearby. Surrounded on all sides, the protagonist faces the gang, and the leader insults him, calling him weak. The gang leader grows annoyed and asks why the new guy is causing trouble there. Calmly, the young man asks what he means, and the aggressor shouts that he was hitting on his girlfriend. With that, the bully threatens him, saying someone like him would cry from a single punch. The other delinquents laugh, and the leader mocks him for bringing a dog to school. The protagonist covers his face and realizes he was invited to be friends, but it was actually a setup for a fight. He apologizes for the trouble and tries to leave, but the redhead prepares to attack him from behind. At that moment, the henchmen block his path and mock his attempt to escape. With a serious expression, the young man tells them to move aside because they are scaring his little pet. One of the aggressors gets irritated by his tone and rushes at him to teach him a lesson, but the hero responds with a precise punch that hits the attacker's chin, knocking him out instantly. The delinquent falls unconscious, and the others are shocked by the strength of the mysterious boy. The gang leader's face turns pale as he cannot believe what just happened. Furious, the remaining henchmen charge together, trying to surround and attack him at once. They wonder how the new guy defeated their friend with a single strike, but the young man only stares at them with cold eyes and prepares for the fight. At that moment, his mutant heart pulses with dark energy, and his power begins to awaken. Then the young man dodges their attacks and strikes back with superhuman speed and strength. Without giving them any chance, he continues landing precise blows and knocks them down one by one. With a final punch, he hits the leader's face, who cannot react in time. Then the hero finishes the fight by throwing the gang leader over his shoulder with great force. With a single strike, he smashes the aggressor's head into a brick wall, which cracks from the impact. He then warns them that he told them to stop because little Fry was getting very scared by all the commotion. The other students watching from a distance are terrified when they see the damage the new guy caused to the wall. With that, they scream that the young man is a monster and run away, frightened by his bizarre and superhuman strength. The delinquent on the ground looks at the wall and cannot believe it is cracking from the force of the blow. Terrified, the bully realizes he is in serious trouble and thinks that a single punch from that guy could break all his bones. He then understands that he picked a fight with the wrong person, and his face twists with pure fear and desperation. Desperate, the redhead bows on the ground and begs for forgiveness, promising that he will never cause trouble again. He then tries to get out of the situation by showing a picture of his own puppy to prove that he also loves animals and never wanted to hurt the pet. The hero looks thoughtful, and the aggressor keeps begging to be forgiven while the young man seems to consider the weak excuse. The delinquent continues showing his phone, and the whole scene becomes very strange, with the bully suddenly trying to act friendly. Suddenly, the young man's stomach growls, and he says that he used a bit of strength and is now very hungry because of it. The redhead is completely confused and wonders why the new guy is thinking about food at a moment like that. At that, the aggressor assumes the young man is being clever and is subtly asking for food in exchange for forgiveness. The scene then shifts to his friend in the classroom. Moments later, they arrive at the school convenience store to finally buy the hero the promised snack. With the table full of food, the protagonist gives thanks and prepares for the feast, while the other just watches from a distance. The young man begins devouring everything eagerly, and the bully watches from afar, still trying to understand the whole situation. He even shares a little of his bread with little Fry, who barks happily and seems to enjoy the strawberry filling. Because of that, the redhead grows confused, since the young man seems powerful but acts like a fool, and he cannot understand his personality. The aggressor remembers that the young man sent one of his guys flying with a single punch and wonders if he is some kind of athlete. But he dismisses the idea, because not even a professional fighter could crack a wall with someone's head. Because of this, he decides that he needs to take drastic measures and calls his boss, asking for help with the problem. In an underground casino, the so-called boss answers and asks what his subordinate wants at that moment. Desperate, the redhead begs for help and says he is in a very difficult situation and needs backup. On the other end of the line, the man complains that he is only contacted when someone gets beaten up and calls him useless because of it. Then the young man begs once again and asks him to save his reputation this time so he will not be humiliated. The boss agrees to help and tells his friends that one of his henchmen got beaten by a new kid at school. He mocks the situation but says he is bored and will stop by to see what is happening. The bully feels relieved and thanks him, promising that he will have the target ready by the time the backup arrives. With a malicious smile, the redhead ends the call and swears that the transfer student will regret ever being born. Suddenly, the hero offers one of his snacks to the aggressor, who is surprised by the unexpected gesture. The young man says he feels bad eating everything alone, and the other refuses, saying he can have it all. With that, the bully gives all the snacks to him and says he can keep the drinks and everything else he bought. The young man is happy and shares the food with his puppy, while the redhead wonders how someone so strong can be so naive. He watches the young man feeding his pet and notices something strange on his hand, which now seems healed. Then the aggressor remembers that he punched the wall, but now his hand is perfectly fine, as if nothing had happened. He starts putting the pieces together and realizes that the young man has superhuman strength and extremely fast regeneration. Remembering a video, the redhead recalls that heart mutants can have different abilities depending on their type. Suddenly he is startled by the possibility and asks if the young man is a mutant, but the puppy ends up throwing up everything. The protagonist panics and denies the accusation, but the aggressor is convinced that he really is a mutant. With that, the bully is left stunned, since it is the first time he has seen a being like that in real life, and he looks completely normal. He then remembers that heart mutants are dangerous, and becomes afraid of what might happen to him now. The redhead thinks his boss will get beaten for nothing if he comes to the school, and the man starts yelling from the other side of the line. On the phone, he warns his subordinate that the young man beside him is a very dangerous and powerful mutant. The aggressor says the situation is serious and that they should cancel the plan, but the boss has a different idea. So the man tells him to keep the target there no matter what, because a mutant is too valuable to let go. The young man finishes eating and says he is leaving, but the bully has to keep him there until the backup arrives. With that, the redhead panics and asks why he is leaving so soon when there is still time before break ends. The hero smiles and explains that he needs to go home, which makes the aggressor even more nervous. Desperate, the bully needs a plan to delay the young man and stop him from leaving too early. So he suggests they skip class and go have some fun outside the school, and the protagonist becomes curious about the idea. They arrive at an arcade, and the hero is amazed by the lights and sounds of such a different place. The young man walks around the area, and the bully realizes it is the first time he has ever been somewhere like that. With his eyes shining, the protagonist says he did not know places like that existed, and the redhead is shocked by the answer. He looks at everything with great attention and is impressed by every detail of that new world. Suddenly, the hero notices a claw machine and recognizes the plush toy his friend has on her backpack. The aggressor is in disbelief and wonders what kind of life the young man lived to have never seen a claw machine before. So he offers to pay for a round, and the young man gets excited by the chance to try winning the toy. With the bully's help, the protagonist controls the claw and is amazed to see the machine move to grab the plushie. With a perfect move, the young man manages to catch the plush toy and celebrates with a joyful shout. He then hugs the toy, happy to have gotten the same one his friend carries on her backpack. The bully watches all of it and thinks that keeping the young man busy until the boss arrives will not be hard at all. He then points to a karaoke place and asks if the hero has ever been somewhere like that before. The two sit down, and the aggressor explains that they can sing their favorite songs there and have a lot of fun. The young man feels awkward and admits that he does not know any songs, leaving the other very surprised. With that, he starts singing a lullaby about a picnic and cotton candy that his mother taught him. The redhead gets irritated and asks why he is singing a children's song in a place like that, but the young man explains that it is the only song he knows because he was separated from his family when he was a child. He reveals that he has not had a normal life since then, and, because of that, never had the chance to learn other songs. The bully is shocked by the story and begins to feel bad about the young man's sad past, as he seems completely alone. He wonders if heart mutants are always so different, and slowly starts to change his view of the young man. With a troubled expression, the aggressor feels his chest tighten and realizes he is starting to grow attached to the mysterious boy. He then offers the hero money and says he is going to show him a whole new world starting now. Suddenly, the two begin playing a drum game with great energy, and the redhead shouts for him to hit faster. In another fighting game, the protagonist uses his foot to play, and the bully complains that he is cheating. But in a dancing game, the hero gets clumsy and ends up falling to the floor with the puppy in his arms. The aggressor laughs at his friend's clumsiness, and the two enjoy themselves together, passing the time in the lively arcade. Outside, the two are breathing heavily, and the redhead comments that they played like crazy in there. The protagonist agrees and says it was the first time he had ever had that much fun, and the bully happily drinks some water. At that moment, the redhead notices something strange and suddenly stops what he is doing while gripping the bottle tightly. With a nervous smile, he looks at his phone and wonders who could be calling at such a bad time. But when he answers, he gets yelled at by his boss, who tells him to pick up faster next time. Then the delinquent remembers that he was supposed to keep the young man there so his boss could come teach him a lesson. At that moment, the young man looks at the pictures they took together and realizes that he acted like a complete fool during their outing. He sees the picture of the two of them making funny poses and notices that he ended up forming a real bond with his target. Meanwhile, the protagonist keeps playing with his little pet, unaware of the betrayal being prepared. The scene shifts to a dark alley where the gang of criminals waits impatiently for the arrival of the young mutant and his pet. Filled with fear, the redhead bows before the leader and apologizes over and over for failing his mission earlier that day. But the boss becomes furious and asks if his subordinate is trying to play games with him in that place. At that moment, the aggressor starts sweating and realizes that his change of heart is not only because of his new human friend. He looks at the hero sitting with the puppy and understands that the little creature is the only family the young man has. With his face in his hands, the delinquent feels terrible and says that the whole situation is just too sad. Then he shows a picture of his own pet and says he understands the pain of losing a loyal companion. Crying, he sits next to the protagonist and regrets almost letting his friends harm the puppy. At that moment, he decides that he needs to protect the animal from any danger that might come. With that, the young man prepares to stand against his gang, but he quickly realizes that the leader has already lost all patience with him. Suddenly, the boss lands a heavy punch on the redhead's face, throwing him aside with great force. Lying on the ground, the subordinate trembles in pain as the villain approaches to continue the beating. The man grabs him by the hair and calls out his name, making it clear that the punishment is far from over. The boss pulls his hair and angrily demands to know where the mutant is hiding. At that moment, the redhead remembers how much fun he had with the boy at the arcade and realizes that his friend is just a normal kid. Meanwhile, the other henchmen surround the young man with bats and iron pipes, ready to act. The masked criminals watch silently, waiting for the leader's order. The boss then asks if the subordinate thinks they all gathered there just to waste time with lies. Desperate, the redhead insists that it is all a misunderstanding about the target. He recalls that the young man passed out from exhaustion after playing just a few games and looked like an ordinary weak kid. With blood on his face, he keeps insisting that the hero is nothing special and apologizes for making the boss come all that way. The leader scratches his head and asks if the redhead is really claiming the boy is not there. Then the aggressor puts on a fake act, placing an arm around the young man and asking if he is upset about getting a few hits from his older brother. The boss lights a cigarette and says that the subordinate's face clearly shows he is lying. With that, the villain demands to know the real reason for the sudden change in his story. The young man starts sweating, thinking about how the hero is not human and how much the world hates people like him. The boss begins laughing and asks if he is really worried about the boy's safety, but the redhead stays silent, realizing the situation is becoming more dangerous. Suddenly, the The villain raises his hand and offers 5 million as a reward if he hands over the target immediately. With a cruel smile, he reveals that he already has a buyer ready to take the boy to the lab without leaving any trace. The delinquent is shocked and wonders if this is not human trafficking. He remembers news he saw about mutants being sold and realizes that it is real. His hand trembles as he understands that his boss is far worse than he thought. Even lying on the ground, the redhead keeps insisting that the hero is nothing special, but the boss does not believe him. With that, the villain loses patience and delivers a powerful kick to the subordinate's stomach, catching him off guard. The impact is so strong that the young man is sent flying and crashes into a wall with brutal force. Lying on the ground, he is in intense pain and can barely breathe after the heavy blow that knocked the air out of him. Furious, the leader complains that he has let many things slide, but now his patience has finally run out. He then stomps on the delinquent's head with all his strength and calls him annoying for lying. At that moment, the man orders his henchmen to beat the traitor until he tells the truth about the mutant. The other aggressors obey and begin kicking the young man without mercy in that burst of anger. The young man tries to shield himself, but the blows keep coming, hitting his entire body without pause. He then remembers the past, when he was just a child being beaten by school bullies. Back then, the boy begged them to stop, but they continued their cruel attacks. Suddenly, his future boss appeared and asked why those kids were beating up one of his people. Frightened, the bullies ran away, and the man told the boy to come with him because he was part of the group now. The boy looked at him with admiration, and the leader called him by name, asking if he was all right. In another memory, the man teaches him how to fight and tells him he is now his older brother within that group. He used to believe his boss was loyal, strong, and someone who never abandoned his own. But back in the present, the redhead continues to be beaten, and all that admiration has disappeared. The delinquent remembers that he wanted to be like his older brothers because they once seemed so strong and impressive. The villain asks if the young man really knows nothing, and says he can see the lie in his eyes clearly. Then the leader looks at him and says that the young man has loyalty, and that is something worth noting. Even while badly injured, the redhead insists that the hero is not worth anything and asks the boss to believe him. But the leader explains that selling the target alone would only bring small money and calls him foolish. He says loyalty means nothing if the body is broken and tells one of his men to bring a chain. Holding the chain, he reminds the young man that his dream was to live a cool and stylish life with his friends. Then the villain says that making money without shame is the coolest way to live. With a cruel smile, he says the two of them can live that kind of life together if the young man cooperates. But the delinquent calls him boss and apologizes, though his expression shows he has made a firm decision. With that, the young man says that his boss is not being cool at all, and faces him with disappointment and sadness. He himself is surprised by his own words, and wonders why he is saying this to such a dangerous man. At that moment, the boss's expression changes completely, and he realizes that his subordinate has truly betrayed him for the boy. Terrified, the redhead tries to apologize, saying he spoke without thinking, but the villain no longer cares. With a hateful look, the leader tells the traitor to die and prepares to strike with his chained fist. But suddenly, a hand appears and grabs the attacker's fist with overwhelming strength, stopping the blow completely. The boss is shocked and notices that the chain is thick and full of weld marks, making it a dangerous weapon. He knows a hit from it would leave a deep scar, and sees the hero holding his arm with ease. The other henchmen are confused and wonder who this new guy is, who appeared out of nowhere to ruin everything. With his face bruised, the redhead asks how his friend managed to find him in that hidden alley. The protagonist explains that he came looking for him because he was not coming home, and he became worried. With tears in his eyes, the injured young man yells for his friend to run because those people are dangerous acquaintances of his. But the young man reveals that he was actually the one who called the gang to teach Gio a lesson, and feels guilty. The redhead continues, admitting that he also told them Gio was a mutant, and the hero asks why. With his face swollen, he grits his teeth in pain and regret for betraying his new friend. He then confesses that he did it because he was angry about being beaten earlier at school. But the protagonist says that is not the point, and asks why his friend is being beaten with that heavy chain. The gang leader watches with a cruel smile, enjoying the confusion. At that moment, the delinquent is shocked and cannot believe the young man is worried about him. Suddenly, one of the henchmen takes advantage of the distraction and tries to strike the hero's head with a baseball bat. The attacker swings with full force, trying to finish him off. With an angry look, the protagonist refuses to let that pass and prepares to fight. Then the other delinquents move in and begin hitting him with different weapons at the same time. The blows land hard, but he protects himself to avoid serious damage to his head. Seeing his owner being attacked, Little Fry barks loudly, trying to scare them and defend him. The redhead is terrified and realizes that the hero is suffering because of his betrayal. The man with the bat understands the situation and shouts that the boy is the heart mutant they were looking for. Red liquid drips from the hero's injured hand as he touches the ground with his fingers. At that moment, his power begins to awaken, and the red liquid on the ground reacts to his mutant body. The aggressor is confused and cannot understand what is happening as the young man's body starts to regenerate. Suddenly, the protagonist rises and delivers a heavy punch straight to the attacker's face, giving him no time to react. With great speed, he begins dodging and countering every attack with precise strikes. Within seconds, one of the men is already on the ground, and the others are terrified by his strength. The henchmen prepare to fight again as the young man walks toward them slowly. With his head lowered, he advances, and his dark aura makes the enemies tense. The gang leader shouts for his men to finish the intruder at once. All the delinquents surround him with bats and prepare to attack together. They swing their weapons, but he avoids every hit, and one of them is sent flying by a powerful kick. In just moments, several of them are already down, badly injured. The young man continues, and lands another crushing punch on an enemy's face, sending him far away. Without pause, he follows with a kick, and finishes the attacker with a final blow. With a cold expression, the protagonist shows that he will show no mercy to those who attacked him. At that moment, one of the masked men tries to strike him with a bat, but he reacts quickly. The hero narrowly avoids the attack, and red liquid splashes, showing how close the hit was. He then uses the enemy's movement against him and counters with an even stronger and more precise strike. The aggressor is thrown violently into the wall and is knocked out instantly. The remaining men are terrified and begin to wonder why the new guy is so strong and whether he is even human. At that moment, the young man grabs another enemy by the collar and stares at him with eyes full of hatred. Desperate, the boss pulls out a sharp object and tells the others to do the same to finish the young man. Then the villain rushes forward and strikes the protagonist with a cheap blow to his side. With a cruel smile, he asks if it hurt and mocks the injury as the young man feels the impact. The hero coughs, and red liquid drips from his mouth, showing that the attack was more serious than it seemed. The villain loses control and begins stabbing him repeatedly, shouting for the monster to disappear. But the young man grabs the blade with his hand, and red liquid drips as he holds it firmly. The gang leader is left confused, unable to understand what is happening. The protagonist stands up and calmly tells the aggressor to stop trying to pierce him like that. He then pulls the weapon out of his own body and grips it, leaving his enemy unarmed. Terrified, the man asks what kind of heart he has to survive such an injury and still stand. The young man looks at him and asks if he is curious about his true mutant power. Without hesitation, he strikes back, hitting the villain's leg, and the man screams from the sudden pain. Seeing that, the other henchmen panic and realize they should not have fought a mutant. The young man throws the weapon aside and prepares to deal with the rest. His eyes glow red, and he charges forward with incredible speed. He warns them that now that they know who he is, none of them will leave that place alive. His expression shows that he will show no mercy to those who hurt his friend. Meanwhile, Little Fry barks loudly, as if cheering him on. In seconds, all the henchmen are on the ground, their faces badly damaged from the blows. The protagonist stands in the middle of the alley, surrounded by defeated enemies, with his puppy beside him. On the ground, the redhead calls his name, still shocked by what he has seen. He asks if the hero is all right and offers to call an ambulance because of the injury. But the young man says he is fine and touches his chest, showing there is no wound left. In shock, his friend realizes the hole is gone and cannot believe the regeneration. With blood still on his face, the redhead stares at him, overwhelmed by what he just witnessed. Then he looks away, filled with guilt for betraying the only friend he has. Among the fallen enemies, the protagonist apologizes, which only confuses him more. Suddenly, the young man clenches his fist tightly, trying to hold back his anger. On the ground, the redhead hits his own head and curses himself for being foolish and choosing the wrong people. The hero is surprised and asks if he was really going to sell a friend like that. With his face down, the delinquent asks for forgiveness and admits that he betrayed him because he stayed close to those bad people. He explains that he thought it was cool to be part of the gang, and that deep down, he is just like them. But the protagonist walks closer and hands him a white cloth, leaving him confused. The hero points out that his nose is bleeding and tells him to clean it. The redhead asks if it is really for him, and the young man confirms with a calm gesture. When he takes it, he realizes it is actually a puppy pad and is surprised. Even so, he uses it to clean his face and says he does not deserve to be treated like a real friend. With a small smile, the young man says that means he was not the only one who saw them as friends, and that is enough for him. The redhead is left speechless, looking at him with admiration. Tears begin to fall, and he can no longer hold back his emotions. He stands up and hugs the protagonist tightly, crying and apologizing for everything. In the middle of the scene, the young man says that Gio is a really good person, and the two finally reconcile. Just then, the redhead's boss appears and tells him to let the protagonist go, saying he has reflected on his mistakes. He and his entire group are tied up and kneeling, promising not to reveal the hero's identity as a mutant. The redhead watches with confusion and irritation, unable to understand what is happening. Then he becomes angry and kicks the boss in the face, shouting for him to apologize properly. He calls the man trash and continues attacking him without stopping. With that, the boss takes the full force of the brutal kick directly to his face. The attacker yells for the man to leave for good while the protagonist calmly watches everything. At that moment, the redhead asks what they should do with those guys and suggests teaching them a lesson. But the tough guy is surprised when the protagonist starts walking away from the scene without saying a word. The big man clasps his hands and begs them not to call the police, promising he will stay quiet. But the hero ignores the plea and calls out to some officers passing by on the street at that moment. 2 police officers approach and say they received a report about a disturbance in the area. Seeing the police, the boss's gang is terrified and does not know how to react. The tough guy quickly approaches the officers, saying he was just about to call them for help. He then points at the group and accuses them of being criminals involved in selling people, adding that if the police check their hideout, they will find plenty of proof of their crimes. The redhead yells that they are all adults and real criminals and asks the officers to arrest them. At that, the boss falls into despair and lets out a loud scream as his plan collapses. Then the villain throws himself on the ground and starts pretending to be injured to fool the police. He claims his bones are broken and that the hero attacked him, which makes the redhead furious. The man points at the protagonist and says he was the one who beat them all up. The tough guy cannot believe the nerve of that lie and yells that they were the ones trying to capture the young man. He even asks if they were not talking about taking apart that innocent-looking boy. The boss yells for the police to look at the protagonist, saying he is perfectly fine and has no injuries. At that moment, the henchmen also start pretending, acting as if they are the victims. The officers ask everyone to calm down, saying they can explain everything at the station, but the big man points at the hero again and shouts that he is a heart mutant. The protagonist is completely shocked by the accusation and does not know what to do in that moment. The officers exchange serious looks, and the man asks if there is not a special law for mutants. With that, the police turn to the young man and ask if he is really a mutant, requesting his documents. The protagonist says he has no documents at all, and his face shows clear nervousness. The officers stare at him and ask if he is an unregistered mutant, since that is against the law. One of the officers then says he will begin the registration and asks for his ID and what his ability is. At that moment, the young man completely panics because he cannot reveal his true identity. He remembers that he had only recently stopped looking like a skeleton and that it would now be harder for them to track him. The young man thinks that if he gets registered, the people from the lab will find him, and the officer keeps insisting. Unexpectedly, a girl runs toward them and yells for them to wait a second. The young woman arrives out of breath and greets the officers with a tired smile. The officers are confused by the sudden arrival and ask who she is. Then she shows her phone with a call on it and asks one of the officers to answer. The officer takes the phone and answers, a little suspicious of the situation. On the other side is Song Heiji's sister, a superintendent from the Special Mutant Task Force. The officer is shocked and immediately salutes, introducing himself as Sergeant Hansup Jin. The woman explains that the case is an attempted kidnapping and that the mutant is a witness. Then she takes responsibility for the matter, and the sergeant says he will follow her orders. The sergeant then orders his partners to arrest only the gang and release the other 2. The police begin arresting the boss, who protests and asks why only they are being taken. He keeps complaining while being handcuffed and demands to know who the person on the phone was. The girl waves with a smile, and the boss wonders who that young woman is. The protagonist asks how she knew he was there. She explains that she saw him at school surrounded by strange guys and decided to follow them. The redhead looks confused, and the hero points at him, asking if he is one of those strange guys, and she confirms. The girl asks what happened to his face since it looks terrible, and the young man explains. She finds the tough guy a bit odd, but remembers he is a good kid and notices his expression. She says her sister already handled the gang, and the redhead starts crying, realizing the hero has friends while he does not. The protagonist turns to the boss and asks who he was planning to hand him over to. With a serious look, he asks if it was the Hermes research lab. The man denies knowing that place and says he was going to sell him to a local dealer. Inside the patrol car, the boss explains that there are dealers who trade mutants. With a determined look, the hero says he wants to find those dealers. The scene shifts to the police station, where the gang leader is being interrogated. Back with the group, the girl says there is no way he can do something like that. The redhead agrees, saying it is very dangerous because there are many dangerous people among those dealers. The young woman also warns that her sister said they target mutants, and are extremely dangerous. With a determined smile, the protagonist says that now he wants to find them even more. The girl then asks why he is so determined to find one of those dealers. The hero touches his face thoughtfully and says he has been wondering about something. He then explains that maybe he can find his old companions through them. The tough guy gets irritated and asks why he never mentioned having friends, but the young man explains they were not friends from outside, but companions from the lab. He says that life there was full of painful experiments and suffering every day. One day he was taken to an unknown place and was terrified during the long walk. He could only think about how painful the next test would be as they pushed him into a room. The place was filled with knives on every side. Suddenly, the knives began flying across the room at incredible speed. Terrified, he thought he would be pierced over and over in that place. The guards behind him were frightening and ordered him to enter quickly. With no choice, the boy obeyed, and the door closed, trapping him inside. But to his surprise, the room was filled with other young mutants. He was shocked to realize he was not alone in that strange test. At that moment, a hand stopped one of the knives heading toward him. Another boy was about to attack the skeleton with a sharp weapon, but his attack was blocked by an unknown force. The protagonist was surrounded by ice that protected him from the strike. The boy who attacked fell to the ground, frustrated that his attack had failed. He then saw that a girl had used her ice powers to save him. The young woman argues with the other boy, who calls the skeleton a monster, but she scolds him and points out that he is wearing a lab coat. As an experiment, just like the others, the skeleton is confused by the situation. Then the other children approach, curious to see him up close. The skeleton shrinks back, asking them not to look at his face because he believes it is ugly. The other young mutants look at him with curiosity, without fear or disgust. One of them says he looks normal, and that his appearance is just part of being a mutant. The boy asks if he is okay and if it is his first time in that training room. With that, all the young people begin introducing themselves one by one in a very friendly way. That is how he met his first friends, and they ask what his name is. Back in the present, he explains that the place gathered children from many different labs. Because of that, they became friends quickly, even with only a few classes, and without seeing each other often. The protagonist stops eating for a moment and looks upward, thinking about the past. The redhead and the girl cry, touched by the sad story of his life in the lab. The young woman then asks where his friends are now, and the young man falls silent. He reveals that on the day they escaped together, they ended up getting separated during the escape. At that, the girl understands that he wants to find the dealer to find his friends. Moved, the young woman and the tough guy promise to help however they can in the search. The redhead remembers that he took the boss's phone and says the dealer's contact is inside it. He shows the meeting time, and the protagonist is startled because it will happen soon. The scene changes to a warehouse where a scream of pain echoes through the place at dusk. Several men run with weapons, yelling for everyone to grab something and attack a target, but a hooded figure dodges the attacks with impressive speed. The mysterious person stops one of the blades with a bare hand, snapping its tip. Holding the blade, he shows how to properly use a weapon like that. He says that way it does not cut properly and attacks the men with devastating speed. In the blink of an eye, all the henchmen are on the ground, defeated and motionless. One of the survivors realizes he cannot beat him with knives and pulls out a gun. The henchman points the weapon at the hooded figure and gets ready to fire. The mysterious figure stands there with a sword and seems completely unconcerned by the threat. This is Li Qiwan, who says his blade can cut through even the hardest steel. His mutant heart is the blade heart, which gives him that incredible power. Another hooded figure tries to flee the scene, running among the fallen bodies, but before he can escape, an attack hits him in the head and knocks him out instantly. With that, The fugitive falls face first onto the ground and stays motionless after the precise strike. Lee Chi-wan tells him to do better next time while watching the scene. Meanwhile, the protagonist arrives at the alley the gang boss mentioned. He looks around and notices that the place is remote and perfect for a secret meeting. The young man confirms that this is the right place and prepares himself for what is coming. Looking at the phone, he sees that there are still 30 minutes before the dealer arrives. He thinks about the dealer who sells mutants and that maybe he is a mutant too. In a flashback, the girl asks if he is really going to meet this dealer. She warns him that they are criminals who hunt mutants, and some of them are mutants themselves. But the young man sees this as a chance to learn more about his missing friends. Even though she is worried, he reassures her, saying that for today, he will only watch from a distance. He assures her that with his ability, he can easily escape if something goes wrong at the meeting. Now in the alley, he thinks that if needed, he should capture the dealer immediately. For that, he looks for something he can use in an ambush and finds a wrench. He knows he cannot attack without thinking first, and that the most important thing is to figure out the other side's ability. Unexpectedly, several knives fly toward him in a sudden surprise attack. The young man is thrown back and cries out in pain after being caught off guard. Lying on the ground, he sees one of the knives stuck right beside his frightened face. A hooded figure appears and calls him a rat for hiding in an alley like that. The mysterious man walks closer and asks if the young man is an undercover cop. The protagonist quickly realizes that this must be the dealer he was waiting for. Seeing the knife, he assumes the man might be just a normal human without powers. Thinking it will be easier to capture him, he prepares to attack with full force. He steadies himself against a concrete block, ready for the fight. In a fast movement, he rushes forward for a direct strike. He closes the distance and prepares to throw a punch, giving no time for a reaction. But the moment he sees the man's face, everything changes, and he freezes in shock. The dealer reveals his identity and introduces himself as Lee Che, one of his former companions from the lab. The protagonist is left speechless and repeats the name in disbelief. Before he can process it, his former friend moves first. Without hesitation, the dealer lunges forward and delivers a strike that sends the hero flying. The impact throws him across the alley, and he crashes hard onto the ground. Lying there, he tries to stand, but something feels wrong. He quickly realizes that his strength is gone because his tendons were cut. He looks at the wounds on his arm and shoulder, which keep bleeding without stopping. His ankles were also hit, leaving him unable to move properly. He understands that his friend's sword skill is far beyond anything normal. At that moment, he remembers the day of the escape, when he was still a skeleton inside the lab. The ceiling collapsed and blocked the path of the escaping mutants. Even with his body only partially restored, he used his strength to hold up the debris and protect everyone. Despite the strain, his expression showed determination. At that time, his friend used his blade to cut through the rubble and open a path. The skeleton had looked at him with respect and gratitude. Back then, his companion had stepped forward and cleared the way for everyone to escape. Back in the present, he asks again how his friend knows his name, but the swordsman only watches as he struggles to stand. Confused, the former companion questions how he is still standing and wonders if he is a mutant. The protagonist shouts that it is him, Kim Ji-ho, the skeleton from the lab. Choi-wan repeats the word, still unsure of what he is hearing. Then he points and asks if he is really the same Kim Ji-ho from before. The hero smiles, relieved that his friend is alive after all this time. Choi-wan, still doubtful, asks again if it is truly him. The protagonist confirms and explains that he finally managed to fully regenerate. Happily, he steps forward to embrace his friend, but the other immediately raises his blade. In a quick motion, he attacks again, and the young man is thrown back, confused. The former companion takes a stance to attack again, while the other tries to defend himself. Wounded, he cannot understand why his friend does not recognize him and keeps attacking. With a cold expression, the swordsman says that after seeing his wounds heal, he is certain. The hero shows his injuries closing and asks why he is doing this. The swordsman states that now he is sure the young man is a true mutant. With another fast strike, he attacks again, but this time the protagonist barely avoids it. Even so, the force throws him back to the ground. From there, he shouts at his former friend, demanding to know why he is acting like this. With a look full of hatred, the swordsman says he should know the answer better than anyone. With that, the hero decides to fight back and rushes forward to land a punch on his former companion, but the attacker is too fast, and the young man ends up taking several cuts. Even injured, he refuses to give up and keeps his fist clenched, ready to continue the fight. Red liquid spreads across the ground, showing how serious his wounds are. He prepares for the next attack as the swordsman comes forward with his blade, but the strike pierces his hand, and he feels terrible pain from the blow. Even so, the young man manages to stop the blade with his bare hand, leaving his former friend surprised. The swordsman asks if he really thinks a punch can work against his sword. The protagonist faces him and says he knows exactly how skilled he is with a blade. At that moment, the former companion is completely shaken by those words. Then the hero takes the opening and grabs the swordsman's arm with great force. The attacker is confused by the young man's strength as his wrist is held in place, stopping any further attack. With a quick movement, the hero twists the enemy's arm and disarms him in an impressive way. The former friend's expression turns to pure shock when he sees the young man's fighting skill. With the path clear, the hero lands a heavy punch that sends the swordsman flying. The impact throws up dust and shows the absurd strength of the young mutant. Lying on the ground, the attacker admits that he is not as weak as he looked before. Then he asks why the protagonist ran away if he could fight like that. The hero is confused by the question and says again that he does not remember running away. The former friend confirms it and says it happened on the day they were escaping from the lab. In a flashback, the guards are seen firing at the young people as they try to escape to freedom. Che-Wan shouts his friend's name and tells him to grab a nearby steel pipe, but the skeleton was just standing there, surrounded, while his friends were being taken down one after another. The former companion accuses him, saying that in that moment he simply ran away by himself. He claims the skeleton fled and left all his friends behind that day. The protagonist is shocked by the accusation and tries to explain what happened. He says he had no choice, and that if he had stayed, everyone would have been lost that day. But the swordsman does not believe him and calls him a coward while leaning against an iron pillar. With that, he shows his absurd strength by crushing the metal pillar with one hand. The structure twists and caves in from the power of his grip. Then the former friend says he knows the hero's regeneration ability very well. He knows that if the young man is torn apart, it will take a long time for him to recover. Then several sharp blades rise from the ground around the hero. He tries to protect himself from the attacks, but his clothes are ripped and stained with red liquid. With his arms, he blocks one of the blades that pierces his body and cries out. At that moment, the swordsman says the real strike will come from somewhere else. Then two blades slam into a support pillar, causing a huge impact. The explosion tears through the area and people run away in fear from the sound. The girl and the redhead watch in shock, and he suggests calling the police immediately. The place is filled with dust and destruction, and the young woman grows worried as she calls out for her friend. The hero holds the blade stuck in his chest, and the swordsman notices that his healing is happening faster. Then the protagonist says it is all a misunderstanding, and that he never truly ran away. He explains that he stayed behind to fight and protect everyone, and that he only went there to save his companions. His former friend looks at him seriously and asks if it really is a misunderstanding. He then hears a noise nearby and wonders if there is another mutant hiding in the area. With a dark expression, he says he heard voices around that place. The young man then reaches out his hand, trying to explain things better. The swordsman interrupts and says they should go to his hideout if they want to talk. He pulls his hood over his head and says many things have happened, and there is a lot to explain. The protagonist watches him, confused by the sudden change in attitude. Sweating, he cannot understand how his friend has changed so much. He remembers that in the lab his companion was cheerful and even shared food with him. Now that same person is a dealer hiding in the shadows, and the hero wonders what happened to him. The scene shifts to a dark place where a sharp object is being held. The young man's face fills with fear and his eyes widen. But instead of a weapon, hamburger ingredients appear in the air, leaving him confused. Inside the place, a mysterious cook chops onions with incredible speed and precision. The protagonist and his friends watch in shock as the cook prepares multiple sandwiches at once with flawless movements. In moments, a perfect hamburger is assembled, with every ingredient placed neatly. The cook's hands move with such control that it almost seems unreal. Then the cook reveals himself to be the old friend, offering the hamburger with a calm smile. He invites everyone to try the new item added to the menu. Suddenly, a crowd of customers appears, praising the cook and his food. Faced with this unexpected scene, the protagonist is completely confused and cannot understand what is happening. Soon, they realize that the hideout is actually a famous and busy diner. In the bathroom, another acquaintance with pink hair looks at himself in the mirror with pride. Later, sitting on a sofa, he explains that this place is now his job. surprising everyone. The hero asks if he really has a job, and the colleague mocks him for being unemployed. The pink-haired man then asks who the people behind him are. The protagonist introduces the girl and the redhead as his new friends who have helped him recently. The former lab companion scoffs at the word friend and at the young man's situation. At that, the girl and the redhead get angry and defend him, saying he has lived a difficult life. But the young man calms them down and says there is no need to worry because the swordsman is actually a good person. Chae-won then asks him to continue the story about what happened on the day of the escape. The protagonist explains that there was a bomb hidden along their escape route at the time. In a flashback, he remembers the moment they were surrounded by the lab guards. His friends were all together and terrified in the middle of the rubble from the destroyed building. It was then that he heard the sound of a time bomb nearby. Having gone through explosion tests before, he recognized the sound of the burning fuse. The scientists planned to blow everything up and bury the young people under the debris. He knew the stronger ones might survive, but the weaker ones would not be as lucky. So he grabbed every bomb he could and ran as far as possible with a determined face. He ran with all his strength to save his companions. Back in the present, he says that after the explosion, he woke up alone in a forest. He explains that when he returned, no one was there, so he thought everyone had escaped safely. The swordsman remembers hearing an explosion from far away on the day of the escape. His friend then asks if he really took the bomb, and the young man confirms that he can survive explosions. With that, the former companion places a hand on his face, as if he cannot believe what he just heard. The hero says he knows it is hard to believe, but his friend unexpectedly says he believes him. Tears start running down his face, and he says there were too many bombs for anyone to explain things at that time. The young man is very confused by the sudden reaction of his former companion from the lab. Suddenly, the friend picks up a knife with a serious expression, and a red background appears behind him. But instead of attacking, hamburger ingredients begin flying through the air again in the kitchen. The swordsman goes back to chopping onions with incredible skill, without even looking at the board. He then hands a full meal to his friend and says he had more or less figured out what happened. The young man is shocked by the food, and the colleague explains that it is a gift for everything he went through. While he is eating, two girls walk over and ask to take a picture with the diner's manager. The friend agrees and poses for a selfie with one of the fans using a bunny ear filter. After the photo, he turns to the protagonist and apologizes for judging him too quickly. He apologizes for attacking without hearing his side of the story, and the young man says it is fine because it did not hurt. The hero eats the sandwich with his mouth full and says it is delicious, and that he feels envious of his friend. The cook then offers him more food if he is still hungry. He points to his name tag and proudly says that he is the manager of the whole store. The young man says that is amazing and that he seems like a normal person, and the friend says it is nothing. He then says the protagonist can be normal too and offers him a job at the diner. The manager says he can even pay a little extra, leaving the hero and his friends shocked. But the protagonist raises his hand and interrupts with a very serious look on his face. The young man accuses him, remembering that he was at the meeting point, and asks why he is a dealer. The friend gets furious at the question and calls him a jerk for asking that after everything from the lab. The hero then realizes that all of this must be just an act from his former companion. The manager scratches his head and explains that he only pretends to be a mutant dealer. He says that when he is not working at the diner, he acts like a dealer to lure criminals, and that it is all just a disguise to catch kidnappers. The hero asks if that is really true, and his friend confirms that it is obviously an act. With that, the young man feels relieved, since he had been truly worried about him. He then asks if the manager really works there and plays the role of a dealer in his spare time, and the friend answers with a smile and a thumbs up. The protagonist says his attitude is impressive. The young man praises his former companion for living well, and the manager gets slightly embarrassed. With his mouth still full, the hero offers to help with anything, which surprises the other. He remembers that his main goal is to find the rest of his companions, and says he will do whatever he can. The manager looks at him with a serious expression, thinking about the offer. Then he slams his fist on the table and says he definitely needs help with his plan. The swordsman explains that there is a dealer to catch, and with the young man's ability it will be easy. He adds that capturing them might lead to information about the others. The former companion points at him and says he will be a great help in the mission. With that, they bump fists and seal the agreement. The manager says he will contact him if he needs backup. He then says goodbye and returns to work, promising to call later with the details of the plan. Outside, the young man thanks his friends for waiting and for letting him talk to his old companion. The redhead, still unsure, asks if he really trusts that friend after all this time. The girl also shows concern, saying she was shocked to hear that he was acting as a dealer, but the protagonist smiles and says everything is fine and that he trusts him completely. In his mind, he remembers his friend smiling like a child and says he has not changed at all. The young woman then asks how the manager will contact him if he does not even have a phone. With a smile, he shows the phone he took from the criminal and says he now has something to use. The scene shifts to a dark alley where a young man runs desperately from a group chasing him. Several men pursue him, shouting for him not to escape. Wounded and exhausted, the young man is cornered in a dead-end alley. In anger, he shouts at them to stop chasing him, and his hand begins to release a golden liquid. The strange substance drips onto the ground and spreads across the alley floor. As the pursuers step on it, they slip and fall due to its oily nature. The fugitive smiles in relief, thinking he has managed to escape again. But before he can celebrate, a heavy punch lands directly on his face. He falls to the ground and looks up, seeing a dark figure asking where he thinks he is going. The young man begs for his life and says his power is useless, only able to produce oil. At that moment, the gang leader grabs him by the hair and calls him pathetic for having such a weak ability. One of the henchmen comments that not every mutant is powerful and that some are no different from normal people. With a wicked smile, the leader says this will be easy money and that they will get $1 billion for him. The young mutant then lets out a scream of pure fear and despair at the situation. Unexpectedly, a figure appears and asks if that is really all they are getting for the job. All the criminals turn around in confusion and wonder who the guy is that showed up out of nowhere. Suddenly, the gang leader is struck by a devastating blow that pierces straight through him. The hero's friend holds his blade and says they should be charging more for risking their lives like this. The henchmen realize he is a mutant and rush in to attack while he counts around 10 enemies. The swordsman then decides it is better to finish everything quickly. In the blink of an eye, all the men who attacked him are defeated and collapse to the ground. He moves with absurd speed and drops another enemy with a precise strike. The leader shouts for his men to grab their weapons and points one toward the hooded figure. At that moment, the pink-haired young man simply places his finger on the gun without any fear. He then reminds the man that his weapons are also made of steel and prepares to attack. At that point, his blade appears along with several sharp swords around him. The boss's weapon starts trembling and twisting in a very strange way. The metal begins to bend and change shape in his hands. The man is completely shocked and cannot understand what is happening to his weapon. From inside the barrel, several sharp blades start to grow and extend rapidly. With that, the spikes pierce the bad guy's hand, and he screams in pain from the sudden attack. The swordsman then turns to the fallen man with a cold and contemptuous look. He says that next time they should choose a place without metal if they want to avoid trouble. The rescued young mutant thanks him for saving him from that terrible situation. He then asks if his savior is also a heart mutant like him, but the swordsman cuts him off and tells him to stay quiet in a very cold tone. Answering a call, he says he is listening to the orders from the other end of the line. He then reports that he has recovered the mutant and can take him back to the lab. The young man is shocked when he hears the word lab and cannot believe what is happening. The swordsman says he is noisy and introduces himself as the dealer who is going to sell him. The scene then changes to a lab where a woman says this is exactly the friend she knows. She praises him, saying he is on another level and extremely reliable in his work. The pink-haired young man says he has one more thing to report over the phone. With a serious expression, he reveals that he has finally found his old friend, Kim Ji-ho. The woman on the other end is completely stunned by the unexpected news. He then asks if the reward they promised for capturing the hero is still valid. With a wicked smile, the woman confirms that the offer is still on the table. Then the diner manager says that he will deliver him the next day without fail. He remembers the fight and thinks that the protagonist is no longer like the skeleton he once knew. His regeneration is now so strong that he healed even after being torn apart. He knows that ordinary methods will not work and that he needs a place with plenty of metal. With that, he holds a pan of steaming curry and says that the food is ready. A little girl in a wheelchair becomes very excited when she sees the delicious curry. He smiles and says he added lots of potatoes because he knows they are her favorite. The girl tastes the food and says she loves it and that it is the best meal ever. The young man gently pats the girl's head and promises to cook anything she wants. The little girl then invites her older brother to sit and eat with her, but he refuses, saying he has somewhere important to go. Her expression turns sad, and she asks if he is going out again. He tells her to eat everything and save some for him because he will return later to finish it. The scene then shifts to their building at night, with the lights glowing. Meanwhile, in another place, the hero's friend is in the kitchen peeling a tangerine. She reflects that he spent the whole day running around and must be completely exhausted. She thinks that meat and fruits are good for restoring energy. With a determined look, she comes up with an idea to help him recover. She prepares a dish of ribs with tangerines and strawberries. She explains that ChatGPT suggested the ingredients go well together and that the flavor should be good. Looking at the recipe, she is surprised that she managed to cook something so unusual and feels proud. She starts wondering if she has a talent for cooking and if she should learn it properly. Then, she decides to send a message to her older sister to check on her. She tells her about the rib dish with fruits, and her sister responds with a disgusted sticker. The young woman gets annoyed and says her sister does not understand good food at all. She then tells her friend that her sister will only arrive late at night and that he can go to sleep. But the young man says he is fine and will stay awake because his friend might call at any moment. With a smile, the girl asks if he was happy to reunite with his old companion. The protagonist smiles widely and says he missed him a lot during all that time. The young woman comments that she has never seen him so relaxed and happy since they met, and he agrees. He then begins to explain that his friend has always been someone very important to him since the lab. In a flashback, the colleague approaches the skeleton and asks why he is sitting alone. The skeleton is startled and does not know how to respond. Embarrassed, he shrinks back and says he was just sitting there doing nothing. The boy notices that the skeleton is missing an arm, and the young man panics and tells him not to touch it. He explains that the wound from an experiment has not healed yet and asks him not to look. With a smile, the friend asks if he is really sad over something like that. Then he asks the skeleton to give him his arm, which leaves him confused. Before he understands what is happening, the colleague does something that shocks him completely. The boy transforms his arm into a giant blade, leaving him stunned. The young man sits down and asks if the new blade arm is not amazing. At that moment, another lab companion appears and accuses the boy of mistreating the skeleton, but he defends himself and says he just made him cooler, asking if a sword arm is not awesome. The skeleton blushes and thinks the new blade arm is the coolest thing he has ever seen. The girl nearby is confused and cannot understand the situation. The colleague smiles and says the skeleton understands what is cool, then extends his fist toward him. The protagonist looks at it without understanding the meaning. The friend explains that it is a fist bump, a sign of trust between them. They complete the gesture, and the skeleton feels that it is something special, like having a real friend. Back in the present, the young man says his friend was amazing and that he admired him a lot. The girl is surprised by the story and wonders why anyone would want a sword for an arm. Even so, she feels happy seeing how much the reunion meant to him. She calls him to eat, but the young man says he is fine and does not need help. Then she presents the special dish she prepared, a very unusual rib with fruits. The young man is shocked and asks what kind of food that is. With pride, she says it is a special dish she made herself. He has never seen anything like it and is surprised by the mix of strawberries and tangerines. Even though he is unsure, he decides to try a piece and thanks her for the meal. With his mouth full, he chews slowly, focusing on the taste with a serious expression. The girl steps closer and nervously asks if the dish turned out well and if he liked the combination. With tears in his eyes, the young man says the food is incredible and truly delicious. He praises the meat, the strawberries, and the tangerines, saying everything fits perfectly together. At that moment, he notices the little dog and asks if he can share some of the food. The young woman refuses, saying it could be dangerous, and the puppy lowers its head with a sad expression. She promises to prepare something proper for him later. The young man says it is the best food he has ever eaten and thanks her sincerely. Happy with the praise, she promises to cook something just as good again. With his cheeks still full, the protagonist agrees and thanks her once more. Suddenly, the phone on the table starts vibrating and ringing, drawing his attention. He sees it as his friend calling and realizes the plan is starting earlier than expected. He answers, and on the other side, his friend asks for help in a desperate voice. He asks what happened, and the colleague says he was hunting the lab's people. Hearing that, the young man's expression tightens instantly. The girl overhears and becomes worried, knowing what that place means to him. His friend asks for help again, and the young man immediately agrees, saying he is on his way. Before ending the call, the colleague gives the address of an abandoned factory. The young man turns to the girl and says his friend is in danger and that he needs to go. He swallows the remaining food and prepares to leave. He apologizes for not finishing the meal, but she tells him it does not matter. He runs out and asks her to stay, but she decides to follow him, worried about what might happen. The scene shifts to an abandoned warehouse, the supposed meeting location. Carefully, the protagonist peeks inside and questions if this is really the place. Inside, the silence feels strange, but he confirms the address is correct. With a cautious gaze, he starts noticing something off about the environment and becomes suspicious. He realizes that the floor and walls are made entirely of metal and immediately goes on alert. He studies the pipes and steel plates and sees that even the ground is covered in metal. With that, he understands that this place gives his friend a complete advantage in a fight. The protagonist cannot understand how his colleague could have been defeated in a place like that, as it makes no sense. He then decides to stay alert, knowing he cannot fall into a hidden trap. The young man imagines his friend tied somewhere in fear, and that thought makes him uneasy. Suddenly, the swordsman places his hands on the ground and activates his mutant ability. Sharp blades erupt from the metal floor at high speed. The young man is struck directly and lets out a cry of pain from the sudden attack. His expression fills with shock as the trap pierces through his body, leaving him unable to react. Suspended in the air by the blades, he realizes the attack is extremely powerful. At that moment, his former friend appears and acknowledges that he came all the way there. Injured, the protagonist questions his actions, still thinking he had been captured. The other tells him to look around and understand the situation for himself. In that instant, the truth becomes clear, and the young man realizes it was all a setup. The attacker confirms the deception and moves in for another strike. Even wounded, the young man catches the blade with his bare hands, suffering damage but holding it in place. He breaks the weapon and immediately avoids the next attacks. The swordsman keeps pressing forward, summoning multiple blades at once. His movements are fast and precise, showing complete control over the fight. In a quick motion, he delivers a strong kick to the protagonist's face. The impact makes red liquid spill from his mouth as he is left disoriented. He is thrown backward and crashes into a stack of wooden crates. Lying on the ground, he faces his former friend, who watches calmly from a distance. The swordsman states that he is glad to have found him again. He notes that seeing him in human form felt strange, yet his voice remained the same. Wounded, the young man listens as his former companion admits that their earlier talk brought back old memories. Then, with a serious expression, he reveals the truth. Everything before had been a lie. Standing still with his blade, the pink-haired man carries a threatening presence. He explains that his role is to hunt mutants and deliver them to the lab. Finally, he makes his goal clear. He intends to send the protagonist back to that place. What is he talking about? No sense. But quickly he places his hands on the metal and begins to consume the power. Before he realizes it, swords appear behind the protagonist. He manages to dodge by a narrow margin, but the real attack was yet to come. This is different from before. Right now it's not about subduing him. It feels like he's actually trying to kill the protagonist. Lee Chae-won, you bastard! He is really trying to capture me after everything we went through together in the laboratory. He doesn't know what's going on, but he should at least explain himself. No need. Just surrender. He places his hand on the iron plate again, and countless swords appear, striking the protagonist. That bastard! Is he insane? Why is Chae-won still in contact with that laboratory? That place is a criminal organization. Wake up, you idiot! The protagonist tries to buy time, but the plate is easily cut in half. Shit. Talking won't work. It's better to run. Running away won't help. With his hands on the ground, swords emerge to try to block the protagonist, who realizes that this place is overflowing with iron. It is the best scenario for his enemy. Don't try to run. Damn, he really came completely prepared. He really intends to hand him over to the laboratory. What the hell is wrong with him? He's saying it doesn't matter if he gets sent back to that hell. That's right, it doesn't matter. Fine, if that's how he feels. The protagonist tries to retaliate with a punch, but ends up being easily counterattacked. But thanks to his fast recovery, he launches a counterattack, catching the enemy off guard and landing a direct hit. What? That much isn't even damage. As expected. After years of suffering, he's built up resistance. Kim Ji-o's recovery ability is different now. Even if he's cut, he heals instantly, and he tries to counterattack in that brief moment. In that case, he will hit him so fast that Ji-o doesn't even get a chance to counter. If he's regenerating, he can't attack back. The protagonist sees Chae-won's eyes and cannot believe what is happening. Flashback. What kind of experiment are they trying to do now? The shackles are released. Resurrection Heart. 225th Regeneration Response Experiment begins. It's starting again. Test subject deployed. As the door opens, we see that it is his childhood friend, Lee Chae-won. What is happening? Today's experiment will observe how the resurrection heart regenerates and recovers when stimulated by the ability of the sword heart. Test subject 0824 will attack test subject 001 using their ability. What? Does he want me to attack Kim Ji-oh? He's telling me to cut him down right now. Insane. Screw that. He's not doing it. The scientist dragged me here just for this. He's leaving. But suddenly, the device on his neck emits an electric discharge that paralyzes him. Stop wasting time and just do it. He will be fine. You lunatic. How could he hurt his own friend? He told you. It doesn't hurt him anyway. He will just die. Hey, you weakling. Stop acting tough and just do what they say. All you do is cut with a sword anyway. Compared to abilities that freeze, burn, or grind people alive, your ability is weak, so just do it. What? He's weak. Yeah, so stop wasting time and finish it already. He will regenerate soon anyway. I'm weak. Good. Let's see if he's really weak. So he charges straight at the protagonist with everything he has, injuring him badly. Did he push him too far? Does it still not hurt? How about this? How about this? It doesn't hurt at all. How about now? 2/25. Regeneration response experiment complete. Chaewon is exhausted. The protagonist is in pain, but at the same time, he thinks. Wait, it doesn't hurt as much as he thought. Don't move, pretend you don't know anything. Since he's covered in his blood, those researcher bastards won't notice. What did you do? Those wounds, don't tell me. He injured himself. Yeah, so shut up and don't get us caught. Why would you do that? He regenerates anyway. Idiot, he knows your recovery is slow as hell. Besides, those laboratory bastards barely even give him enough blood to regenerate properly because they say he's dangerous. And don't try the same self-sacrifice act. It's embarrassing between friends. Why you of all people? Back to the present. The protagonist braces himself and attempts a counterattack, but he stops the attack. Could it be? Even after cutting him like that, he's still. This seriously hurts his pride. He's not fighting. Get lost. Even after cutting you this much, he's still joking around. Just give up and let yourself be captured. Because no matter what, he's handing him over to the laboratory. Or else. Song Heiji, Jo Taegu, your friends. Should he capture them first instead? This bastard Jiho, he cut his mouth and is absorbing the blood. By heavily absorbing the enemy's blood, the protagonist quickly recovers the arm he had lost. Wait, the arm that was cut off. And with that same recovered arm, he lands a direct hit to the opponent's stomach, sending him flying several meters from the impact. Shit, 3 of his ribs are broken. His body has a lot of iron in it, so most attacks don't affect him. If he gets hit again, it will be fatal. But before he can even think, the protagonist has already rushed forward and delivers another blow to the face, sending him flying again. He's too fast. He can't even react. And once again, Gio appears behind him, ready to strike another blow, hitting him again, this time forcing him back. Shit. Where the hell is that strength coming from? Did he really get this strong just by absorbing his blood? He needs to widen the distance somehow and take control of the pace. What the hell? Is he predicting where his blades will appear? No. He's seeing it with his own eyes, and dodging. His reaction speed is this insane. Wasn't Kim Ji-oh's ability supposed to be the resurrection? It wasn't just regeneration. Compared to when he was a skeleton, his strength, speed, reflexes, and stamina, every single ability is on a completely different level. At this rate, he will lose. Damned it. He didn't want to use this. Absorbing iron particles to the limit, every blood vessel and organ is being torn apart by the iron particles, but in return, the sword heart reacts violently, and like an explosion, it releases hundreds of blades. Kim Ji-ho, no matter how much you regenerate, he won't break through these countless blades. But the protagonist doesn't care at all. He advances anyway. So what? So what if he has them? It doesn't matter. He will keep hitting. This kind of thing doesn't hurt at all. His flesh tearing apart, blades stabbing into him. He can endure that much. The thing that really hurts him is, the protagonist doesn't let the enemy breathe. He keeps beating him down and breaking every blade with each strike, not giving him any chance to react. After all, what really hurts is being betrayed by his own friend. With a final blow, he says, that's what hurts the most. Even more than your blades. A friend he has known for 10 years trying to send him back to that horrible laboratory. That hurts his heart more. Why did he do it? He still doesn't understand. What did the laboratory promise you? That place is so horrible. He knows it better than anyone. Saying that now, what difference does it make? He follows the laboratory now. He was going to seal him to them. We can't go back to being friends anymore. Shut up. What are you talking about? Don't decide that on your own like that. Don't run away by saying everything is over. If you sold me out, tell me what you got in return. At least make me understand. Even if it's just an excuse, say something. At the very least. If he ever considered him a friend? Yeah, a friend. He remembers the past, when the two of them fought and at the same time played around. We had quite a bit of fun. Sorry, he has nothing to say. Before they can finish the conversation, footsteps are heard. A SWAT-like squad appears in the warehouse. Who are these people? All of them are carrying weapons. The protagonist is surrounded by them. Heart mutant detected. Requesting backup inside the factory. No way. The laboratory. Test subject 0001 has escaped due to containment system malfunction. Suppress immediately. The child with the resurrection heart. Maintain fire. Continue shooting and transport the target. Damn, he needs to run. He grabs an iron bar and throws it toward the squad in order to create a distraction, then runs while carrying his friend. The mutant is escaping. Chase him. But after running a bit, he quickly encounters more enemies. Mutant escape route secured. We have them surrounded from front and back. Completely surrounded. Stay alert. Both of them are heart mutants. Maintain watch until we report to headquarters. If they resist, you are authorized to shoot. Police Special Assault Team Leader, Im Jin-wook. Team A, block external entry. Team B, load live ammunition and prepare to fire. If he gets captured like this, he will be sent back to the laboratory. Once firing, preparations are complete. But something strange happens. A female hand interrupts the message. From now on, she will take control of this scene. Mutant Special Police Task Force Leader Song Hyein. Wait, she's Leader Song Hyein of the Mutant Special Task Force. Leader Song is here. How did she get here? Everyone lower your guns. Understood. Cease fire. Everyone lower your weapons. She walks up to the protagonist. You must be Geo, don't be afraid. She came to help him. She heard everything about his situation from her younger sister. She's Hyeji's older sister. Her name is Song Hyein. Nice to meet you. He instantly recognized her as Song Hyeji's older sister. Hyein told him there was no reason to worry, making it clear that she would take control of everything from that point forward. She then shifted her attention toward the special assault team and questioned whether they had only arrived because of the mutant incident. One of the soldiers immediately responded with a sharp salute. Without wasting time, Hyein began taking command of the situation. She ordered the squad to block civilians from entering the area and instructed them to call for paramedics. But Captain Im Jin-wook refused to back down so easily. He raised his voice and stopped everyone, demanding to know if her task force intended to ignore standard field procedures. Hyein stayed completely calm. Without the slightest hesitation, she questioned whether the captain even understood the laws regarding police authority. Her assistant quickly stepped forward and explained that cases involving wanted mutants automatically gave their team priority over the scene. He shoved Lee Ki-won's warrant toward the captain and coldly told him to stay out of the way. Im Jin-wook let out a mocking scoff and claimed they had misunderstood who the real target was. He pointed past them with his gloved hand, making it clear that he was not referring to Ki-won, but to the boy wearing the black t-shirt. Ji-ho immediately froze in place as the captain revealed that CCTV footage had already identified him as another mutant. The captain argued that because Ji-ho was an unregistered mutant, he still counted as a civilian under police authority. He ordered his men to hold their fire while preparing to move toward their new target. A second later, the command to arrest Ji-ho echoed through the warehouse, and dozens of tactical rifles instantly aimed at him. Ji-ho clenched his teeth as he looked around at the weapons surrounding him, his mind racing for a way to escape the situation. Then, a sharp snap suddenly cut through the warehouse. Complex red geometric patterns immediately spread across the surface of one soldier's rifle. The glowing lines moved like an infection, rapidly crawling from weapon to weapon until every firearm held by the assault team was completely covered. An explosive burst of metal fragments tore through the air. The rifles shattered apart in the soldiers' hands, breaking into countless pieces that scattered across the floor. The elite squad stood frozen in disbelief, staring down at their empty hands and the ruined scraps of metal beneath them. One officer muttered in fear after finally understanding the truth. This was team leader Song Hyein's mutant ability. Hei-in stared directly at them, making it clear that they still did not understand how dangerous the situation truly was. Captain Im became furious, yelling at her for using her power against her own allies. Hei-in showed no reaction and simply snapped her fingers again. Jin-Wook cried out as the pressure from her ability started crushing him. Hei-in kept her arms crossed, completely calm despite the captain's shouting. She stepped closer and revealed that this case was part of a special investigation connected to the Hermes laboratory. The moment the captain heard the lab's name, his expression changed with real concern. Hei-in told him to look around if he still doubted her words. She pointed at the destruction across the floor, showing the traces left behind by the battle between the two mutants. The captain looked at the boys again as the seriousness of the situation finally sank in. He realized they were not simple delinquents, but dangerous subjects tied to the Hermes lab's research. He understood that dealing with mutants of this level could cost his men their lives. Reluctantly, he admitted she should have explained it sooner, before ordering his team to hand over control. Two soldiers roughly pulled Lee Ki-wan to his feet, causing Gio to ask where they were taking him. The assistant explained that Ki-wan was a wanted criminal and would go through formal arrest procedures. Gio watched his friend get handcuffed and led away, wondering if Ki-wan had really done something that serious. The man in the suit then turned to Gio, saying they would also need his testimony. He informed him that he would be taken for a private interview with the team leader. Gio looked toward Song Hai-in, feeling nervous again under her stare. Later, Song Hai-in sat across the table with her eyes fixed on the files in front of her. A faint, confident smirk appeared on her face. Kim Gio shifted uncomfortably in his seat beneath her intense gaze. He sat alone in the silent interview room as the tension between them continued to grow. Hei-in quickly got to the point while looking through the documents. She revealed that her team was currently hunting the Hermes laboratory. She mentioned that she had already heard about his escape 3 years ago from Song Hai-ji. Then she slid a document across the table and explained that Gio still did not know the lab's true activities. Gio's face immediately turned pale after hearing those words. She revealed that every other escapee from the laboratory had already been captured again. Hei-in explained the lab's method of letting subjects escape on purpose, only to hunt them down later and crush their hope. The goal was to break them mentally and force them into complete submission by proving they could never truly escape. Gio stared blankly ahead as he realized Lee Ki-wan may have already fallen victim to that same method. Elsewhere in the facility, Ki-wan sat silently with his head lowered and his hands restrained. An assistant entered the room and announced that the witness had finally arrived. Gio looked up, wondering who could possibly know the truth behind everything. A young girl in a wheelchair was brought into the room. She looked weak and nervous. The man in the suit stepped aside, allowing Lee Ki-wan to become the focus. Song Hai-in lowered herself to the girl's level and gently held her hand, trying to calm her down. She explained that nobody would force her to speak, but they needed to understand her brother's reasons. Ki-wan lowered her head as a tear rolled down her cheek. Her body trembled while she cried, blaming herself for everything that had happened. Her fist tightened as she explained that her brother had not always been the person he had become. The girl was clearly afraid, terrified that speaking would only make her lose her brother once again. Hei-in kept her calm smile and warned her that remaining silent would only leave Ki-wan to carry all the blame alone. After wiping away her tears, Ki-wan realized she could not leave him to suffer by himself anymore. She finally raised her head and agreed to tell the task force everything she knew. Her story went back 3 years, to the day her brother first returned home. Ki-wan burst through the front door while still wearing the blood-stained hospital gown from the laboratory. He suddenly stopped after seeing the dark and ruined condition of his childhood home. In the shadows, he found his sister sitting alone in silence, her body weak and her eyes empty. Shock completely froze him as he realized both of their parents were already dead. He collapsed beside her and held her tightly while crying and apologizing for arriving too late. To cover her growing medical expenses, Ki-wan started doing exhausting labor at a construction site. But because he had no legal identity, he constantly suffered from low pay and abuse from his employers. The little money he earned was never enough, and his sister's condition only grew worse until she started coughing up blood. Then one day, the small piece they had built together was destroyed when tactical units suddenly kicked down their door. Ki-wan was immediately tackled to the floor by several armed men and pinned down before he could react. His sister cried out for her brother, desperately reaching toward him while the soldiers restrained him by force. Filled with rage, Ki-wan shouted wildly, threatening to kill all of them if they did not let go of his sister. A man in a suit entered the room and looked down at the defeated boy with a cold smile. He crouched beside Ki-won and offered him a deal, a legal identity, a job, and enough money to save his sister. Ki-won listened as the laboratory presented its offer. They promised to cover everything his family needed as long as he agreed to handle their dirty work in secret. His sister explained how deeply the laboratory supported them, paying for medical treatment and even providing their home. In return, her brother was forced to keep complete silence about the terrible things he was ordered to do. Tears ran down her face as she admitted the guilt crushing her from inside. She finally understood that every bit of help she received had been bought through the crimes her brother committed for her sake. Lowering her head in shame, she apologized through her sobbing. The small interrogation room grew heavy with silence after her confession. Kim Ji-ho watched her quietly while processing the truth. He realized the person who betrayed him was not simply a criminal, but a desperate brother trying to save his sister's life. Soon after, a guard pushed the crying girl out of the room in her wheelchair, leaving silence behind. Song Hae-in calmly stated that this explained the full history of the incident. She then pulled out another document, her tone turning professional again. Hae-in made it clear that despite the tragic reason behind everything, the betrayal still happened. Lee Ki-won had willingly chosen to hand Ji-ho back to the people who tortured him. She reminded him how close he came to losing his freedom again. If the plan had succeeded, he would not be sitting there now. He would have returned to the laboratory and its experiments. Ji-ho lowered his eyes, accepting the painful truth. He knew Ki-won's crimes went far beyond betraying him once, and punishment was waiting for him. Song Hae-in gestured toward the phone attached to the wall. She offered Ji-ho one last opportunity to speak with Ki-won before the legal system fully took control. Ji-ho stared at the dark receiver, while the bruises from the fight still covered his face. He struggled between anger and the desire for closure. After a moment, he gave a small nod and accepted the offer. There were still things he needed to say. He walked toward the phone and slowly dialed the number. The cold room felt even quieter, as the ringing sound echoed through the line. Ji-ho waited silently with the receiver pressed against his ear. His torn clothes still carried the marks of the battle they had barely survived. When the call connected, Ji-ho stayed silent at first. On the other side, Lee Ki-won also held the phone without speaking. He already knew who was calling before hearing a single word. After a long pause, Ji-ho finally spoke in a low and steady voice. He told Ki-won that he had heard everything from his sister. The laboratory, her condition, and the reason behind the betrayal were no longer secrets. Ji-ho demanded to know why Ki-won kept everything hidden. If they were supposed to be like brothers, why did he never say anything? A tired sigh came from the other side of the line. Ki-won had nothing left to defend himself with. Ji-ho's tone grew colder as his patience started fading. He was not asking for an apology. He only wanted the truth. He demanded an explanation for why Ki-won chose to do it. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Anger rose inside Ji-ho as he cursed him for the betrayal. The pain from being betrayed still hurt more than the injuries from their fight. His grip tightened around the receiver hard enough to make the plastic creak. He demanded at least some excuse, wondering if Ki-won was too ashamed to even speak. Ji-ho slammed his hand onto the counter, leaving cracks spreading across its surface. He reminded Ki-won that he had tried to hand over a friend just to send him back to that nightmare. On the other side, Ki-won lowered his head while every word hit him heavily. He still offered no excuse. Ji-ho told him to spend the rest of his life suffering with regret for what he had done. To him, their bond was completely over. Ki-won closed his eyes and quietly accepted those words. He looked like someone who had already lost the will to keep fighting. Finally, he admitted that Ji-ho had every right to hate him. He refused to beg for forgiveness he did not deserve. Ki-won slowly moved to hang up the phone, ready to disappear into prison and leave everything behind. Before the call ended, Ji-ho stopped him with one last thing. He mentioned that the police had already promised to take care of his sister. His grip on the receiver loosened slightly as the silence between them changed. Ji-ho admitted that Ki-won was garbage, but his sister had done nothing wrong. He made sure she would not suffer because of his crimes. Then he told Ki-won to finish his sentence and come back out alive. Before ending the call, Ji-ho added one final unexpected request. He asked for another burger someday, admitting the last one had actually tasted good. Slowly, Ji-ho lowered the receiver as the call disconnected. The conversation was over. A memory from the laboratory surfaced in his mind, showing a thin and broken Kim Ji-ho. Even when he was barely alive himself, he still worried about the people around him. A younger Lee Ki-won appeared in the memory, his cheeks still full as he ate whatever scraps they could find. Back then, They were only children trying to survive inside a nightmare. In the present, Kiwon sat alone in the darkness. Quietly, he whispered one final thank you to the boy he had nearly destroyed. Jiho returned the phone to its hook, finally leaving the past behind. He remained standing there for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. Song Hye-in looked up from her screen, surprised by the way he handled the conversation. She admitted that he was far more forgiving than she would have been in the same situation. Jiho turned away from her as his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He confessed that he truly believed the others had escaped and found freedom too. Looking down at the floor, he carried the heavy thought of his missing friends. He only wanted to believe they had managed to live better lives than the ones they suffered through in the laboratory. Standing beside the phone, Kim Jiho slowly accepted the truth. His friends were never truly free. The people at the laboratory were still keeping them imprisoned and using them however they pleased. Song Hye-in listened carefully as Jiho made a desperate request. He turned toward her again, his voice filled with determination as he asked for her help in rescuing the others still trapped inside that place. A faint smile appeared on Hye-in's face. She placed her phone down on the table while watching the boy who had finally found a reason to fight beyond simple survival. Leaning forward, her expression became more serious as she asked whether he was truly prepared for what would come next. Jiho answered without hesitation, saying none of it mattered as long as they succeeded. He looked down at his hand as his muscles tightened and dark veins glowed beneath his skin. He understood that he was no longer the weak skeleton trapped inside the laboratory. Now, he had the strength to change things. His eyes sharpened with determination, showing that he was done running away. He swore to save his friends and destroy the entire laboratory no matter what it cost him. Later that night, the city remained quiet as the scene shifted toward an apartment building. Lights glowed behind the windows, but one apartment was far from peaceful. Inside, Song Hye-in suddenly burst through the front door, completely dropping her cold professional attitude as she loudly called for Song Hae-jae. Jiho followed behind her, looking confused by the sudden change in behavior. Without hesitation, Hye-in rushed forward and wrapped Song Hae-jae in a huge hug, acting like a completely different person. After being away for several days, she immediately demanded to know whether her little sister had missed her. She rubbed her cheek against the younger girl's face while ignoring all resistance. Song Hae-jae struggled to escape the overwhelming affection, telling her sister to stop. Song Hye-in continued smothering her sister with affection while scolding her for not washing up immediately after getting home. She insisted that her little sister must have felt lonely without her and refused to let go. From the hallway, Jiho watched the scene in complete disbelief. He never imagined the terrifying woman from the interrogation room could act this soft around her family. He remembered the cold way Hye-in treated Captain Jin-wook and compared it to the person standing in front of him now. At that moment, Jiho realized his first impression of her had only shown half of who she really was. Hye-in quickly returned to hugging her sister again, making it obvious that Song Hae-jae was the most important person in her life. Jiho simply stood there, still trying to process this unexpected side of his new ally. Eventually, Song Hae-jae managed to speak while looking toward Jiho with concern. She asked whether he was okay after hearing about the serious trouble involving his friend earlier. Jiho awkwardly scratched the back of his neck and looked down while thinking about everything involving Lee Ki-won. The situation was too complicated to explain properly. He forced a small smile and admitted things were fine now that her sister had handled everything. Despite how terrible the situation became, he was still grateful for the help. Relief immediately appeared on Song Hae-jae's face after hearing that things worked out safely. She finally slipped away from her sister's arms and shifted her attention elsewhere. Then she asked Jiho if he wanted to finish the galbi gym he could not eat earlier. A faint blush appeared on his face as he quickly nodded, his empty stomach reminding him how long it had been since he ate properly. Song Hae-jae suddenly checked her phone, but her face quickly turned pale after reading a message from her sister. The recipe mentioned strawberries, oysters, and included a strange sticker of a rabbit vomiting a rainbow. Moments later, Song Hae-jae proudly placed a huge pot in front of them and encouraged everyone to try her sweet and sour galbi jim. Steam rose from the strange mix of meat, strawberries, and whole oranges. Song Hye-in stared silently at the food, her doubtful expression saying everything before she even spoke. Using her chopsticks carefully, she lifted a slice of orange while questioning why oysters were somehow inside a beef dish. Without thinking, she asked what kind of lunatic taught her to cook like this, accidentally letting her rougher tone slip out. Song Hae-jae looked shocked by the language, forcing Hye-in to quickly change the subject and ask where the recipe came from instead. Excitedly, the younger girl pulled out her phone and proudly showed them GBT, the AI that gave her the detailed recipe. Because the instructions looked so professional, she completely believed the dish would turn out amazing. Song Hye-in stared at the strange dish with a deadly serious expression. Her eyes stayed locked on the bizarre meal as she wondered if the AI was deliberately insulting human intelligence with this disaster. She focused on the shining orange slice while trying to understand how fruit and fatty meat were supposed to work together. After a long silence, she finally delivered her honest opinion. Looking directly at her sister, Hae-in bluntly stated that the food did not even look edible. Song Hae-jai proudly raised her phone and showed them the recipe she found online. She explained that she adjusted the recipe herself to help her sister recover energy by adding extra vitamins. Hae-in looked at the strange mixture inside the pot with obvious doubt. Behind her, Hae-jai excitedly explained how she improved the AI-generated recipe even further. Meanwhile, Hae-in stared at the dish in disbelief, already convinced this meal would end with severe stomach pain. A pair of chopsticks slowly lifted a bright orange slice from the bowl. Someone had decided to test the food first. Kim Jae-oh immediately took a bite without hesitation, stuffing the mix of meat and fruit into his mouth. Hae-jai nervously watched him and admitted he did not need to force himself if it tasted terrible. At the same time, Hae-in's expression clearly showed she hated the flavor, yet she still forced herself to give a thumbs up to avoid hurting her sister's feelings. Seeing their reactions, Hae-jai's face brightened with happiness. Hae-in struggled to keep herself from throwing up while blushing in embarrassment as she admitted the strange mix of oysters, strawberries, and meat somehow tasted surprisingly good. Hae-jai clenched her fists in victory, thrilled that everyone liked her unusual recipe. Meanwhile, Jae-oh gave a thumbs up with tears running down his face. After years without a proper meal, he was genuinely moved by the food, while Hae-in could only wonder how he was capable of praising something that tasted like torture. Jae-oh quickly emptied his bowl and claimed he could eat meals like this every day. He completely accepted Hae-jai's strange cooking skills. Hae-in watched him carefully and seriously questioned whether the laboratory experiments had destroyed his sense of taste along with the rest of his body. To her, his praise sounded almost suspicious. Only minutes later, every bowl on the table was completely empty. Once the meal ended, silence settled across the room. Hae-in placed her chopsticks down and announced they needed to discuss an important issue regarding Jae-oh's future. Pointing her chopsticks toward him, she brought up the uncomfortable reality of his current living arrangement. She explained that having a healthy man living together with two women was not exactly ideal, especially for Hae-jai's social development. Hae-jai lowered her eyes as she realized how difficult it would be to continue hiding someone being hunted by the laboratory. Hae-jai asked where else Jae-oh could possibly stay. Hae-in explained that although she had considered placing him inside police housing, it was still safer to keep his identity hidden for now. Jae-oh quietly sat there while holding the small dog, Tweejim. Taking control of the situation herself, Hae-in pulled out her phone and searched for other options. She quickly made a call, asking if any official police residences still had empty rooms available. Meanwhile, Jae-oh and Hae-jai waited nervously nearby. Hae-in listened calmly to the response while the two anxiously waited for the answer. After ending the call, she explained that every residence was currently full, and it would take time before a room became available. Even so, she seemed slightly relieved knowing a future solution at least existed. Since there were no immediate alternatives, Hae-in allowed Jae-oh to stay with them temporarily. His face immediately brightened as he repeatedly thanked her for letting him stay. The heavy atmosphere finally eased as Jae-oh and Hae-jai happily celebrated the news together, while Tweejim barked excitedly beside them. But before Jae-oh became too relaxed, Hae-in suddenly began writing something on a piece of paper. She made it clear that staying there would come with strict conditions. The smile on Jae-oh's face instantly disappeared as the mood turned serious again. With a sharp motion, Hae-in slammed the paper onto the table and returned to her cold, authoritative attitude. She immediately began listing the rules. Jae-oh was only allowed to use the living room as his personal space, and under absolutely no circumstances could he enter Hae-jai's bedroom. The paper contained 10 strict house rules that he would have to obey and sign. Everything was included, from bathroom use to kitchen boundaries. Hae-in leaned close and quietly warned him that breaking those rules would lead to consequences worse than he could imagine. Jae-oh gripped the paper nervously as she stared directly into his eyes. Her intense glare made sure he fully understood how serious she was about the rule involving her sister's room. His face turned pale as he quickly agreed to follow every single condition. Nearby, Heijai watched the scene while looking slightly overwhelmed by her sister's sudden intensity. Afterward, Heian stood up and ordered Jo to follow her outside, abruptly ending the conversation. Jo swallowed nervously while wondering what kind of situation he was about to face next. Soon after, the two arrived at a quiet construction site. The entire area was empty, making it the perfect place for Heian's plan. Without wasting time, she got straight to the point. If Kim Jo truly wanted to help destroy the laboratory, she needed to understand exactly what his mutation was capable of first. Jo then began explaining the basics of his regeneration ability. Jo explained that as long as he was not killed instantly, his body could recover from almost any injury. Looking down at his hand, he revealed the weakness behind the ability. His regeneration consumed blood, and whenever his blood reserves became too low, his healing ability weakened drastically. Heian narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced that this was the full extent of his mutation. She studied him carefully, suspecting there was more behind his power. Then she brought up the damage left behind during his fight with Lee Ki-wan. The destruction at the factory did not look like something caused by a simple healer. It looked like the work of someone with monstrous physical strength. Jo slowly clenched his fist and admitted that he had always felt physically different from normal people. He believed the mutation inside his heart permanently enhanced all of his physical abilities far beyond average human limits. Heian silently stared at him. To her, calling it slightly stronger than others was a massive understatement after witnessing the destruction firsthand. Jo explained that while trapped inside the laboratory, he never had the chance to fully recover or push his body to its limits. Only during the recent chaos did he finally realize how powerful he had become. Still, there was another condition attached to that strength. He noticed his physical abilities increased even more whenever he absorbed fresh blood. Heian tapped her temple thoughtfully while processing the information. For him, blood was not simply medicine. It acted like fuel for his entire body. Without another word, she turned around and started walking away, signaling the beginning of the real test. A heavy object suddenly slid across the dirt and stopped in front of him. It was a testing device she specifically brought for the evaluation. Jo picked it up carefully while examining the unfamiliar machine. It was a grip dynamometer, and Heian simply instructed him to squeeze it with all his strength. The moment he looked at the device, memories from the laboratory flashed through his mind. He had seen similar tools before, always held by researchers who treated him like nothing more than an experiment. Adjusting his grip on the handle, he prepared himself. This was not only a test for Heian, but also a chance for him to understand his own growth. Jo steadied himself and focused all his strength into his right arm. He concentrated on the hidden power flowing inside his body. Veins bulged beneath his skin and glowed as blood rushed into his hand. The pressure building inside his arm became visible from the outside. Grinding his teeth, he released a sharp breath while squeezing with everything he had. His eyes showed complete focus without holding back at all. Then, with a loud crack, the dynamometer exploded apart in his hand. Springs and shattered plastic scattered everywhere as the machine failed to handle his strength. For the first time, Heian's calm expression completely broke as she stared at the destroyed device. That testing device was built to withstand up to 500 kilograms of force, yet Jo crushed it into pieces without difficulty. Heian immediately began calculating his strength in her head. His grip strength had already surpassed that of a fully grown gorilla. The moment he realized what happened, Jo started panicking and hurriedly waved his hands while trying to apologize. He clearly never intended to destroy the expensive equipment. Heian quietly watched him as her expression slowly became more serious. He was far stronger than she originally estimated. Without warning, she raised one hand, and the rocks surrounding them suddenly lifted into the air. The atmosphere instantly changed as she revealed her own mutation. Jo froze in shock while staring at the floating boulders above him. He never expected her to suddenly demonstrate her abilities like this. Without hesitation, Heian launched the jagged rocks toward him at deadly speed. It immediately turned into a brutal test of his reflexes and instincts. Jo burst into motion, twisting and diving to avoid the incoming projectiles. His movements became sharp and animal-like, his body reacting faster than his thoughts. Then one of the stones finally struck him directly in the forehead, causing him to cry out in pain. Even with his speed, Heian's control over the flying rocks remained impossible to predict. Afterward, Heian stopped the attack while looking mildly impressed. She explained that the rocks were flying in completely random patterns, yet he still managed to dodge almost all of them. Then she gave her conclusion. Based on his performance, Jo officially qualified as a high-rank heart mutant. Still rubbing his forehead, Jo looked completely confused. He asked if her mutation was basically some kind of superpower after seeing the floating stones move so unnaturally. Hei-in responded with a flat expression, clearly unimpressed by the comparison. She immediately corrected him and explained that everything mutants could do still existed within the boundaries of science. According to her, true superpowers did not exist. However, she added one important detail. Her specific mutation was classified as a national secret, so she had no intention of explaining it further. Keeping her back turned toward him, Heian then gave him his first serious order. He needed to hide his abilities and avoid drawing attention to himself as much as possible. Her eyes became cold as she delivered one final warning. She understood he had spent his life being treated like a weapon, but outside the laboratory, that kind of attention would only make him a target. Jo silently stared back as her words settled into his mind. He understood she was right. Standing out too much would only send him back into another cage. His thoughts drifted toward every fight he had been involved in since escaping the laboratory. He realized he had been using his strength far too recklessly, and that kind of behavior was dangerous. The tense atmosphere suddenly broke when a cheerful voice called out from the distance. Song Haiji approached them while carrying a plastic bag and smiling brightly. She waved a cold can of soda in the air and announced that she brought drinks for the two of them. Her arrival immediately brought some normality back to the situation. After spending the morning being tested and hit by flying rocks, Jo practically stared at the drinks with hunger. Hei-in quietly watched him with a rare hint of sympathy. Despite all the power inside him, she realized he was still just a young boy who had lost everything. Hei-in prepared to leave for a work call, leaving the two alone at the construction site. Song Haiji asked where she was going, and her older sister simply told them to save some food for her before leaving. Kim Jo immediately grabbed the cold soda Haiji brought him and took a huge, desperate gulp. Haiji watched him with a bright smile, curious about his reaction to the Coca-Cola. The moment the drink hit him, he nearly choked from excitement while loudly declaring that it tasted incredible. After years of surviving on laboratory food, the sudden rush of sugar and carbonation completely overwhelmed his senses. Jo stared at the red can as if it were something miraculous. He excitedly described the sweetness, the tingling feeling on his tongue, and the sharp sensation in his throat. To him, it felt like something inside his head had suddenly switched on. Haiji laughed at his dramatic reaction, genuinely happy to see him enjoying something so simple. But then his expression suddenly changed as he looked at the cold condensation running down the can. The taste triggered a memory buried deep inside his mind. A flashback appeared. Lee Ki-wan stood inside a small makeshift kitchen, while serving him a large burger with a rare and honest smile. Back then, it was the only real meal Jo had ever eaten inside the laboratory. The memory hit him heavily, and the brightness disappeared from his face. He remembered that Ki-wan was the one who made that burger for him, while they were both still trapped in the laboratory. Haiji immediately noticed the shift in his mood and leaned closer with concern. The cheerful atmosphere vanished almost instantly. Jo looked away quietly, his eyes weighed down by painful memories. He muttered that it was nothing while trying to bury the thought again. Still, Haiji did not look convinced. She could tell the simple taste of soda had brought back something painful. Jo slowly closed his eyes before finally admitting the truth. He confessed that he had simply been thinking about his friend again. The grief was still fresh inside him. The two quietly sat together on the construction bench, while the distant city skyline faded into the background. Jo admitted that he was not only close to Ki-wan, but to all the other test subjects as well. Haiji listened silently and commented on how deeply he cared about them. She remembered how relaxed he looked back at the burger shop whenever he was surrounded by people who understood him. Jo lowered his gaze toward the ground as his voice became quieter. To him, those children were not just companions. They were the only family he had. Terrible memories from the experiments flashed through his mind. He remembered sitting restrained to a chair as nothing more than a starving skeleton while scientists in gas masks treated him like an object. Yet even inside that nightmare, the children still found tiny moments of humanity together. He remembered all of them gathered around a small handmade cake, pretending for a few short minutes that they were ordinary children. He remembered his closest friends, the people who gave him a reason to survive through the torture. They were the only thing keeping him sane inside that endless nightmare. Back in the present, Jo looked completely broken. For so long, he dreamed about all of them escaping together and finally finding happiness, yet he was the only one who managed to get out. His face twisted with anger and grief as thoughts of his trapped friends filled his mind. The guilt of surviving alone was clearly crushing him. His fist tightened so hard that his knuckles turned pale and began shaking. Deep inside, he made a silent promise that he would return and save every single one of them. The determination in his eyes looked fierce enough to destroy everything standing in his way. If necessary, he was ready to tear the entire laboratory apart with his own hands. Beside him, Haijai quietly watched with a mixture of sympathy and support. She could see the scars the laboratory left behind, not only on his body, but inside his heart as well. After a moment, Jo calmed himself and looked back at her. His voice softened as he humbly admitted that he was not a mutant like Haiyan, so he did not know how useful he could truly be. Even so, he promised to help however he could. Haijai immediately answered him with a warm smile. She told him he could rely on her whenever he needed help. Jo blinked in surprise, caught off guard by such honest kindness. It felt completely different from the cold and harsh life he had always known. A small but genuine smile appeared on his face as he thanked her. For the first time since escaping the laboratory, he felt like he might truly have someone on his side. Several days later, the scene shifted toward the large gates of Samuel High School. For someone who spent most of his life trapped inside a concrete laboratory, the place felt like an entirely different world. Inside the classroom, rumors about the new transfer student spread immediately. Two girls whispered excitedly while wondering about the mysterious newcomer. Nearby, another group of girls was already panicking over his appearance. They called him unbelievably handsome, while joking about finding his social media accounts. The history teacher slammed his book against the desk to quiet the noisy classroom. Then he officially introduced the transfer student. Standing at the front of the room, Jo felt completely exposed. Inside his chest, his mutated heart pounded heavily. A sudden fear gripped him as he wondered whether he could ever blend into a normal life. He stared across the classroom filled with curious faces while his thoughts spiraled. Even now, he still could not understand how Heian managed to arrange his school transfer so quickly. When Jo tried introducing himself, his voice shook nervously. He looked close to collapsing as he remembered Haiyan mentioning that he would meet someone important at the school. Forcing himself to speak, he barely managed to say his name while sweat formed across his forehead under the gaze of the entire class. To him, this social pressure felt far more terrifying than any laboratory experiment. After finally taking his seat, he stared blankly at the blackboard in complete disbelief. He still could not fully accept that he was actually sitting inside a normal classroom. Whispers continued spreading across the classroom, and Jiho's anxiety only grew worse. His face turned pale as nausea hit him, making him wonder if he was about to throw up directly onto his desk. Behind him, several girls were already whispering about how attractive he looked. The attention was the last thing he wanted. The boys were no different, constantly throwing questions at him about where he came from and whether he played soccer. Jiho lowered his head, completely overwhelmed by the noise surrounding him. The scene shifted back several days earlier, when the plan was first created. Standing in the kitchen with a heavy shopping bag, Haiyan explained that she was assigning Jiho his first mission. While eating dinner, she revealed that she had been preparing this for some time. If he wanted to stay safe and appear normal, he needed to attend high school and blend in with ordinary students. Jiho reached into the brown bag and touched a piece of clean white fabric. Confusion crossed his face as he pulled out a neatly folded school uniform. The moment he unfolded the shirt, realization hit him. Beside him, Song Haiji looked equally shocked after recognizing it as the uniform from her own school. Heian's cold voice echoed in his mind as she informed him that starting the next day, he would attend the same school as Haiji. According to her, this was his very first mission. The scene then shifted to the crowded halls of Samuel High School as the school bell rang loudly through the building. To Jiho, the familiar school sound felt strangely foreign. Students rushed through the hallways while shoes scraped loudly against the tiled floors in every direction. Inside the classroom, Jiho was immediately surrounded by curious classmates. They crowded around his desk and bombarded him with endless questions about his social media, workout routine, and favorite video games. When they asked where he transferred from, he struggled badly to answer without stumbling over his words. The overwhelming curiosity of the students left him completely tense. At that moment, he remembered Heian's warning. She bluntly told him that he still carried the feeling of the laboratory around him and needed to learn how to act like a normal person for the sake of the investigation. Heian leaned closer during that conversation and firmly reminded him that blending in was essential. If he wanted to survive and help her mission, He needed to master the ability to appear ordinary. Back in the present, the pressure around him only continued to grow. Several girls openly admired his clear skin and handsome appearance while talking excitedly nearby. Jiho remained stiff in his seat, knowing he could not allow anyone to suspect he was a heart mutant. Sweat slowly formed across his forehead as more students kept speaking to him. Between club invitations and questions about weekend plans, he felt like he was drowning under the social pressure of school life. Panic slowly started taking over as he stared at the crowd of eager faces surrounding him. He began thinking that he had already failed and exposed himself before his first day even properly started. Then suddenly, a loud crash exploded across the classroom as a huge hand slammed down onto Jiho's desk. A sharp command suddenly cut through the classroom noise, instantly silencing the crowd around Jiho. Joe Tagu stood beside the desk, his red hair and athletic build giving him an intimidating presence. He glared at the other students and called them out for surrounding the new transfer student and making him uncomfortable. Without hesitation, Tagu casually threw an arm over Jiho's shoulder and took control of the situation. He immediately began inventing a fake story, claiming Jiho was a local transfer student who quit gaming but happened to be talented at every sport, especially soccer. Jiho stared at his unexpected rescuer in complete shock after recognizing Tagu in this setting. Around them, the other students whispered among themselves, confused by how different the two looked together, almost like they belonged in completely separate worlds. With another confident thumbs up, Tagu continued building the lie and boldly claimed they were childhood friends. Jiho could only remain silent while listening to Tagu create an entire fake history to protect him. Tagu then waved the crowd away and told everyone to leave so he could properly catch up with his old friend. Eventually, the students finally dispersed and left the two alone near the back of the classroom. Once the area cleared, Jiho looked toward Tagu with a relieved smile. Quietly, he thanked him for stepping in at the perfect moment. Tagu's expression quickly became more serious as he leaned closer, his face darkening slightly. He explained that he already heard everything from Heijai and understood exactly what Jiho needed to do to survive as a normal student. Hearing that immediately gave Jiho a new sense of relief. Knowing someone familiar with the school was on his side made the mission feel far less impossible. Tagu suddenly struck a dramatic pose and gave another exaggerated thumbs up while acting like sparkles surrounded him. Excitedly, he told Jiho to ask him for help anytime he got confused or stuck. However, the confident atmosphere disappeared the moment Tagu got called on during class. His face instantly lost all color as he nervously admitted he did not know the answer. At the front of the room, the history teacher sighed heavily in frustration. He scolded Tagu for failing to remember even the most basic material, despite exams being close. After telling him to stay quiet, the teacher moved on to another question. He asked the class which bacteria caused the Black Death. Trying to act confident again, Tagu rested his chin on his hand and claimed the teacher was underestimating his intelligence. Then, with complete confidence, he loudly shouted, "COVID!" across the room. The absurd answer left the entire classroom frozen in stunned silence for a brief moment. Without hesitation, the history teacher smacked Tagu on the head using his pointer stick. The classroom immediately exploded with laughter as the teacher angrily criticized the ridiculous answer. Watching the scene, Jiho could not stop himself from quietly laughing. For the first time since entering the school, his tension finally started easing. Meanwhile, Tagu sat at his desk, rubbing the spot where he had been hit while sulking in embarrassment. Then the teacher's attention shifted toward the back of the classroom. Pointing directly at Jiho, he decided to test the new transfer student next to see whether he was any smarter than his loud friend. Tagu's eyes widened in panic for Jiho. He already knew Jiho was incredibly strong physically, but he completely assumed the boy was just as hopeless academically as he was. To everyone's surprise, Jiho calmly raised his hand and answered the question without hesitation. He clearly stated that the bacteria responsible was Yersinia pestis. The complicated name came out smoothly as he spoke with complete confidence. The history teacher looked visibly shocked, his eyebrows lifting in surprise. Around the classroom, students immediately began whispering in amazement. One girl near the front laughed quietly while pointing out that Jiho was nothing like Tagu at all. The comparison only made Jiho stand out even more. Curious now, the teacher adjusted his glasses and asked whether Jiho had already been studying ahead. Without wasting time, he followed up with another question about India's social hierarchy. Before the teacher even finished speaking, Jiho immediately answered that it was the caste system. The speed of his response left the entire classroom stunned. Interested now, the teacher began throwing questions at him one after another. He asked about the Crusades, Roman history, the French Revolution, and the beginning of World War I. Jiho answered every single question correctly without pausing once. He identified Jerusalem, Diocletian, the Sarajevo incident, and even repeated the slogan of liberty without hesitation. The classroom slowly fell into complete silence as the students stared at him in disbelief. The history teacher slowly pushed up his glasses with a trembling finger while muttering that it was unbelievable. Turning toward the rest of the class, he admitted that in all his years of teaching, he had never seen a student answer questions so quickly. Soon after, he started a loud round of applause for the new transfer student. Jiho awkwardly scratched the back of his head while blushing from the sudden praise. Meanwhile, the students whispered excitedly, already convinced that a genius had transferred into their class. At the back of the room, Tagu looked completely shattered. His face turned pale blue as he stared at Jiho in horror. He could not believe he had mistaken him for an idiot. Outside, sunlight shined brightly over the large campus of Samil High School. Jiho's mission to blend into school life had already taken a far more dramatic turn than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Tagu completely lost his mind over Jiho, suddenly revealing himself as a history genius. Jiho simply looked confused while calmly packing his bag. Tagu repeatedly brought up the Sarajevo incident, unable to understand how someone could know such obscure textbook details. Jiho casually corrected his pronunciation while staring at him blankly. To him, it was simply information he happened to know. As he zipped up his school tracksuit, he smiled brightly and admitted that he did not actually know what the incident itself was about. He only remembered hearing the name before. Tagu stood there speechless, completely unable to process the logic. Knowing the answer without understanding the meaning made no sense to him. Still confused, Tagu hurried after Jiho and demanded to know how he answered every question correctly if he barely understood the subjects. As they walked together, Jiho gave only a vague explanation. The scene then flashed back to his time inside the laboratory. A thin, skeletal Jiho sat alone inside a padded cell while surrounded by textbooks. He explained that the scientists allowed him to read simply to keep him occupied. Even trapped inside that nightmare, he found comfort in studying. Jiho admitted that he spent his time imagining future conversations he could have someday if he ever managed to make friends. Back in the present, Tagu fell completely silent after hearing the truth. The harsh reality of Jiho's childhood finally began sinking in for Tagu. Tears started pouring down his face as he processed everything his friend had gone through. He completely broke down after realizing Jiho spent his entire life trapped in loneliness and suffering. Tagu cried openly, devastated by the thought of someone memorizing textbooks simply to escape unbearable boredom. Eventually, he forced himself to calm down and tried acting cool again by throwing his jacket over his shoulder. He told Jiho that PE class was next and promised to show him what real fun looked like. Soon after, the scene shifted to the school gymnasium, where the entire class gathered for physical education. At the center of the court, the teacher held a volleyball while explaining the rules for the day. The class would be participating in a dodgeball match between two sections. Immediately, the students became excited and started exchanging competitive trash talk. Jiho quietly leaned toward Tagu and asked what dodgeball even was. Hearing that only reminded Tagu once again how much of normal life Jiho had missed. A quick explanation of the rules followed. Players stayed inside their zones, threw balls at opponents, and tried not to get hit. Jiho looked slightly nervous about participating in his first real game. Tagu confidently gave him a thumbs up and told him to trust his guidance. That confidence lasted only a few seconds. Suddenly, a dodgeball slammed directly into Tagu's face. He collapsed instantly with a loud scream after getting hit without warning. The opposing team burst into laughter at the brutal knockout. Jiho quickly rushed over to check whether Tagu was seriously hurt. Tagu slowly stood back up with blood dripping from his nose while still trying to protect his pride. He stubbornly claimed the hit barely even hurt. Jiho immediately pointed out the obvious nosebleed, genuinely worried about him. Ignoring the concern, Tagu pointed toward the court. Jiho was now the last remaining player on their team. Wiping the blood from his nose, Tagu finally admitted that dodgeball might not be his strongest sport. Now standing alone, Jiho looked overwhelmed as every student in the gym focused on him. Before leaving the court, Tagu quickly pulled him aside to give one final warning. He told Jiho to use only half of his strength so he would not accidentally expose his powers. Jiho instantly remembered the last time he tried holding back and nearly killed someone anyway. Nervously, he agreed to do his best. Tagu headed toward the sidelines while the teacher yelled at him to leave the court immediately. Meanwhile, Ji-ho stayed frozen in place while repeatedly reminding himself to use only half his strength. He became completely trapped inside his own thoughts, desperately trying to understand how someone measured half of inhuman power. A giant image of a gorilla appeared in his imagination as a reminder of his monstrous strength. Suddenly, one of the opposing students launched a powerful throw while mocking Ji-ho for spacing out during the game. The ball shot through the air at high speed. Ji-ho stared at it in panic. He still had no idea how to properly control his strength. At the last possible moment, his instincts took over. He twisted his body sharply and dodged the ball just before it flew past his face. Even while moving, he remained stuck in thought, desperately trying to calculate the correct amount of strength for a normal school game. Then a strange realization suddenly hit him. He began wondering whether Tagu literally meant splitting his body's power in half. Meanwhile, the other students watched in shock as Ji-ho effortlessly dodged every incoming ball. Some of them already started thinking the new transfer student was secretly a professional athlete. Ji-ho narrowed his eyes with complete focus. He began dodging using only movements from his upper body while keeping his legs perfectly still. His body swayed left and right in unnatural ways without moving from the same spot. The sight looked completely inhuman. After images even started appearing behind him as balls continuously flew past. From the sidelines, Tagu saw the bizarre scene and immediately started waving his arms in panic. He shouted at Ji-ho to stop after realizing his advice had been taken far too literally. Ji-ho suddenly paused in confusion. Now he started wondering whether half-strength actually meant splitting power between left and right. The moment he stopped to think, another dodgeball flew straight forward and smashed directly into his face. The opponent showed no mercy and launched one final throw with enough force to end the match immediately. The entire gym fell silent the moment the ball connected. Kim Ji-ho crashed onto the floor and remained motionless after taking the direct hit. After a few moments, he slowly pushed himself back up. Fresh blood dripped from his nose where the ball struck him. One of his teammates leaned closer and nervously asked whether the transfer student was okay. Instead of getting angry, Ji-ho suddenly burst into laughter while wiping the blood from his lip. The rest of the class let out relieved sighs after realizing he was actually enjoying himself. Up in the stands, several girls were already becoming fans of the new student. They whispered excitedly about how Ji-ho was not only handsome, but unexpectedly athletic too. Nearby, Song Hae-jae quietly watched from the sidelines with her chin resting against her hands. A small, satisfied smile appeared on her face as she realized Ji-ho was adapting to school life surprisingly well. As the sun slowly began setting over the city, the school day finally came to an end. Students scattered across the campus while talking about exams and making plans to visit nearby PC cafes. Ji-ho walked home together with Jo Tagu and Song Hae-jae. Tagu casually rested his arms behind his head while asking how Ji-ho's first full day as a normal student felt. Grinning proudly, Tagu reminded him that hiding his secret would take serious effort. He clearly enjoyed acting like Ji-ho's guide through normal school life. Pointing at himself confidently, Tagu claimed he was the only person in the entire school that the former lab experiment could fully trust. Ji-ho simply smiled and agreed. As they walked, he quietly reflected on how different this atmosphere felt compared to the cold and lifeless laboratory. A week quickly passed, and Ji-ho slowly began adjusting to the rhythm of school life. He watched Tagu dominating soccer games on the field and enjoyed seeing people live freely without anyone controlling them. He saw classmates crowded around handheld game consoles while laughing and shouting together. The constant noise and energy of normal teenagers still felt unfamiliar to him. At the snack bar, he discovered he could buy whatever food he wanted as long as he had enough money. While happily eating a bread bun, he listened to Tagu constantly talking beside him. During another walk home, Ji-ho admitted that normal life still felt awkward sometimes. He was still trying to understand all the unspoken rules of being an ordinary teenager. Song Hae-jae turned toward him with a cheerful smile. She admitted that despite the awkward moments, she genuinely enjoyed spending the day together. Tagu suddenly stopped walking after hearing Ji-ho speak so honestly. Ji-ho quietly confessed that without meeting the two of them, he never would have known life could feel this normal and peaceful. With his backpack hanging from his shoulders, he sincerely thanked them both. It was a rare moment of honest gratitude from someone who had lost almost everything. Tagu immediately became embarrassed and told Ji-ho to stop acting emotional. Still grumbling, he insisted there was still a lot left for Ji-ho to learn about surviving high school. Soon after, the scene shifted away from the peaceful streets and toward a hidden warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The area was dark, silent, and completely isolated from the public eye. A group of men in dark suits moved through the warehouse, their footsteps echoing across the empty building. One of them asked whether the lab had noticed anything suspicious about their activities yet. The leader looked pleased and explained that the higher-ups still had no idea they had been secretly stealing supplies. According to him, they only needed to stay quiet for a few more days before they were completely safe. Suddenly, he stopped walking and narrowed his eyes after sensing something strange nearby. In the shadows, a man sat alone while casually eating instant ramen. It was Kang Do-young, and he looked completely relaxed. Do-young loudly slurped his noodles while hiding his face behind dark sunglasses. Without concern, he mentioned that the men arrived earlier than expected and asked them to wait until he finished eating. The boss immediately dismissed him as some random homeless man and ordered one of his subordinates to throw him out. The thug charged forward, but Do-young reacted faster. He instantly blocked the attack while angrily yelling about his spilled soup. The boss became furious and called him insane for caring more about ramen than his own safety. He threatened to smash Do-young's skull if he did not leave immediately. Still crouched on the ground, Do-young ignored the threats while quietly examining the men through his sunglasses. Holding a sausage skewer in one hand, he carefully checked whether these were the people he had been searching for. Then he adjusted his glasses and complained that the dark tint made it difficult to see properly. His eyesight seemed far more important to him than the armed men surrounding him. Finally, he lifted the sunglasses from his face and revealed a chilling grin. The atmosphere instantly changed. A violent shockwave suddenly exploded through the air and shattered his glasses into pieces. Cracks started spreading across Do-young's skin as his body hardened into stone. His face slowly transformed into something resembling ancient rock. Do-young mocked the terrified men and told them to stop acting like cowards. Then he fully stood up while his body continued transforming into a living weapon. At that moment, the thugs realized they were no longer facing an ordinary human. Do-young casually asked how much money they had stolen from the laboratory. He made it clear that he came specifically for the stolen cash and had no intention of leaving empty-handed. Inside his chest beat the heart of rock. Cracked stone covered it while glowing red energy pulsed through the gaps with destructive force. Raising a massive hand made entirely of stone, Do-young calmly informed the men that he would now be collecting their stolen money as compensation. A week later, the scene shifted back to the school soccer field. Students played a lively match while laughter and shouting filled the air. Kim Ji-ho ran alongside his classmates and looked more like a normal student with each passing day. For the first time in his life, he slowly began feeling like he truly belonged somewhere. Sitting quietly in class afterward, Ji-ho reflected on the mission Song Ha-yin gave him when he first arrived. The task had been simple. He needed to live like an ordinary person and adapt to normal life. Now, surrounded by the constant noise and chatter of classmates, Ji-ho thought back to how terrified he initially was of being exposed. At first, he focused so much on hiding his identity that he could not enjoy anything around him. He remembered his awkward posture, nervous reactions, and stiff behavior during sports activities. Back then, he constantly worried that everyone around him noticed how strange he acted. But little by little, those fears were replaced by a growing sense of belonging. Later, Ji-ho sat beside Joe Tagu at a convenience store table while happily eating a steamed bun. Nearby, a girl quietly watched the two talking together. As Ji-ho continued spending his days studying, eating, and laughing with people his own age, he finally realized how enjoyable school life truly was. Back on the soccer field, Ji-ho sprinted forward with a wide and genuine smile. His loosened tie fluttered behind him while he celebrated a successful play. The tall apartment buildings surrounding the school stood in sharp contrast to the cold laboratory where he once lived. Joe Tagu ran across the field and loudly shouted for Ji-ho to take the shot. The soccer ball flew through the air with a powerful sound as the game reached an intense moment. Ji-ho locked onto the incoming ball with complete focus. As he ran forward, he quietly marveled at the simple joy of being able to play freely again. It was a freedom he once believed he would never experience. With a sharp grunt, Ji-ho stopped the incoming soccer ball directly against his chest, his eyes locked in concentration. He smoothly controlled the impact and immediately prepared for his next move. His legs blurred across the field as he dribbled past the other students with impressive speed. Then he spun his body perfectly, building momentum for a clean finishing shot that looked straight out of a professional training video. But despite the perfect form, the result was a complete disaster. Ji-ho completely missed the ball. His body lost balance instantly, and he crashed flat onto his back with a loud slam. His legs kicked awkwardly into the air while the soccer ball rolled harmlessly away from him. For a few seconds, he simply lay there on the grass looking completely stunned by his own mistake. The entire class burst into laughter at the ridiculous scene. Some students jokingly argued about whether Jiho was actually athletic or just absurdly lucky all the time. Meanwhile, Jiho sat up on the field and laughed together with everyone else, while his face turned bright red from embarrassment. Scratching the back of his head, he quietly wondered if he finally looked normal to the people around him. Nearby, Song Haijai waved cheerfully and announced that classroom cleaning duty was finally finished. Soon after, the three students walked together through the school gates while the afternoon sun slowly began setting. As they headed home, Jiho reflected on how happy he had become. The terrifying days spent running from the laboratory already felt strangely distant. During the walk, Jiho suddenly stopped after noticing a chicken skewer from a nearby street vendor. The smell alone completely captivated him. His eyes focused on the glistening oil covering the meat, as though he had discovered some legendary treasure instead of simple street food. Tagu and Song Haijai watched him with amused expressions, while he continued staring at the skewer in silence. Tagu laughed and pointed out that Jiho reacted this way every single time somebody bought him food. With a mischievous grin, Tagu leaned closer and threatened to eat the skewer himself if Jiho kept staring at it instead of taking a bite. Jiho immediately flinched and pulled the food protectively against his chest. He explained that he planned to share it with Tweejim later. However, Haijai quickly warned him that seasoned food was unhealthy for dogs. Their peaceful walk was suddenly interrupted by a painful groan coming from nearby. Turning toward the sound, they spotted a man in a navy tracksuit lying face down beside a flower bed. The man groaned weakly about starving to death. This was Kang Do-young, and he looked completely exhausted. A brief flashback revealed that earlier that night, Do-young fought against a large group of thugs. The battle drained nearly all of his strength. Back in the present, he desperately searched his surroundings for anything that could restore his energy. His eyes finally locked onto a nearby flower bed filled with white daisies. Slowly, he reached a trembling hand toward the soil while thinking he could at least absorb minerals through his strange heart to survive a little longer. Before his fingers could touch the dirt, Jiho suddenly grabbed his arm and stopped him. Startled, Do-young looked up at the unexpected high school student. With complete seriousness, Jiho warned him that eating dirt would only destroy his stomach. Then he pointed toward the nearby plants and calmly explained that dandelion leaves and clovers were technically edible if he was truly desperate for food. A short distance away, Haijai and Tagu watched the bizarre scene in total confusion, while Jiho casually gave survival advice to someone they assumed was homeless. Do-young frantically waved both hands, trying to clear up the misunderstanding, and insist that he was not actually homeless. The three students simply stared at him in silence, clearly unconvinced. Then suddenly, Do-young's nose twitched after catching a strong scent nearby. His eyes immediately locked onto the chicken skewer in Jiho's hand. Pointing at it with a trembling finger, he desperately asked if he could have it. Jiho glanced down at the skewer, realizing he still had not taken a single bite. Looking at the starving man's expression, he suddenly remembered his own past when he wandered alone without food. Thinking about how Haijai once helped him during those days, Jiho decided to help someone else in return. Without hesitation, he offered the skewer to Do-young. The man wasted no time. He opened his mouth wide and swallowed the entire skewer in one aggressive bite. Jiho, Tagu, and Haijai could only stare in complete shock. A loud, satisfied burp escaped from Do-young as he casually pulled the empty wooden stick from his mouth. He collapsed backward onto the ground, while the calories immediately restored some of his energy. Do-young repeatedly thanked them while passionately praising the perfect balance of seasoning and chicken. Meanwhile, Jiho stared sadly at the empty stick, devastated that he never even got one bite himself. Trying to comfort him, Haijai promised she would buy him another one later. Do-young suddenly sat upright with a smirk and reached into a black duffel bag. He explained that he intended to properly repay them for the favor. The moment he unzipped the bag, stacks of cash became visible inside. The students froze in disbelief. Do-young casually grabbed a thick bundle of bills and offered it to them as thanks. Tagu and Haijai immediately realized this man was definitely not the homeless stranger they first assumed him to be. Meanwhile, Jiho and Tagu stared at the money awkwardly, unsure whether accepting such a huge reward for one chicken skewer was reasonable. Before anyone could decide, A blur suddenly rushed past them. Two thieves riding a motorcycle sped through the street and instantly snatched the bag of money from Do Young's hands. The motorcycle tore through the crowd while nearby pedestrians shouted for someone to stop the thieves. Hei-Jai quickly grabbed her phone to call the police, but by the time she looked up again, both Ji-ho and Do Young had already disappeared. The two were sprinting after the motorcycle at full speed while Tagu struggled to keep up behind them. Looking back, the thieves laughed mockingly and questioned whether idiots on foot seriously thought they could catch a motorcycle. Ji-ho suddenly told Tagu to stay behind and insisted he would handle the chase himself. Tagu immediately understood the situation. Ji-ho needed privacy if he was going to use his real powers without exposing himself in public. Realizing this, Tagu instantly grabbed onto Do Young's shirt and pretended to stumble from exhaustion in order to slow him down. Unfortunately, the sudden pull ripped the back of Do Young's pants directly across the seat. Do Young immediately lost his temper and snapped angrily at Tagu. Meanwhile, Tagu awkwardly laughed and apologized while pretending it was an accident. Far ahead, Ji-ho sprinted through the streets with complete focus on recovering the stolen money. Inside his chest, the resurrection heart glowed with intense red energy. The pulsing power fueled his body with monstrous speed. Every step exploded against the pavement as his feet barely touched the ground. Ji-ho turned into a blur racing through the city, leaving after-images behind him while rapidly closing the distance. One of the thieves glanced backward through his helmet visor. His eyes widened in pure disbelief after realizing that a high school student running on foot was somehow catching up to their speeding motorcycle. The motorcycle driver looked over his shoulder and started sweating as Ji-ho rapidly closed the distance behind them. Ji-ho's silhouette darkened while his glowing red eyes stayed locked onto the bike. He reached forward like a predator chasing prey. The thieves panicked and screamed at each other to go faster. The motorcycle sharply turned a corner, its tires screeching across the asphalt. Ji-ho matched the movement perfectly, his shoes scraping against the road as he continued the chase without slowing down. The thieves could not understand how someone running on foot was keeping up with a motorcycle. The driver gritted his teeth in fear after realizing their top speed was not enough to escape him. Even after several turns, the distance between them never increased. At that moment, they realized Ji-ho was not human. They were being chased by a variant. Ahead of them, they spotted a construction site. One of the thieves grabbed a metal pole and smashed the support of nearby scaffolding. He yelled at Ji-ho to get lost as a huge pile of cinder blocks collapsed above the street. Ji-ho looked up just as the concrete blocks rained down toward him. He gritted his teeth right before impact. The blocks crashed onto him with a thunderous explosion, burying him under rubble and dust. The thieves laughed and waved goodbye while speeding away. One of them even raised a middle finger. Only a pile of broken concrete remained where Ji-ho stood. Then a painful groan came from beneath the rubble. Ji-ho slowly pushed the blocks away and forced himself back up. He clutched his head dizzy from the impact, but his mind stayed focused on catching the thieves. Nearby pedestrians stopped in horror while watching an injured student crawl out of the wreckage. A crowd quickly gathered, whispering nervously and wondering if he needed a hospital. The scene shifted to the outskirts of the city as the sun painted the sky orange. The thieves pulled into an abandoned warehouse area, leaving dust behind their motorcycle. After checking behind them, they finally relaxed and celebrated escaping their pursuer. Laughing loudly, they bragged about the money they stole while heading toward their hideout. Then suddenly, the driver froze. A familiar figure stepped directly into their path. It was Kang Do-young, and he looked furious. Without hesitation, Do-young threw a massive punch into the motorcycle. The impact stopped the bike instantly and flipped it across the concrete. Both thieves were launched violently onto the ground while their helmets rolled away. Do-young slowly walked toward them. He calmly asked why they were running so desperately. Then he lowered his sunglasses. Cracks spread across his face as gray stone covered his skin. He warned them that running was useless because he could sense their movements through the ground. The thieves immediately realized they had encountered another monster. Kang Do-young stood before them with half his face transformed into jagged stone. Stretching out his hand, he coldly stated that the money was not theirs. Then he demanded they hand it over. One of the thieves remained kneeling silently, with his face lowered toward the ground. The tattooed thief pointed at Do-young and questioned whether a heart variant made his body as hard as iron plates. More thieves suddenly arrived on motorcycles, their headlights lighting up the dark warehouse. The sound of engines echoed through the building as they surrounded Do-young from every side. The tattooed man stood proudly in the center and declared that this warehouse belonged to them. He stepped closer, and stated that they planned to sell Do-young off as well. Do-young slowly looked up with a faint smirk and casually asked if that was really true. He lowered himself into a crouch and pressed one hand against the floor, calmly noting that they were lacking numbers. Inside his chest, a stone-like heart pulsed with a deep red glow. Do-young slammed his palm against the ground. A violent shockwave spread across the concrete floor. One of the thieves shouted for everyone to run him over before he could fully use his powers. A motorcycle immediately accelerated toward him while weaving through piles of dirt. Suddenly, the ground began cracking apart beneath the bikes. The concrete violently shifted and rose upward. The thieves looked down in panic as massive chunks of stone burst from the asphalt. Do-young remained crouched while calmly declaring that he would bury their entire hideout. Huge pillars of rock exploded from the floor, smashing through the building supports. The scene shifted to a corporate office. A man in a black suit bowed respectfully while handing a folder across a desk. He informed the woman sitting there that he had gathered the tracking data she requested. The official was a slim woman with short black hair and a pinstriped blazer. She calmly opened the file. Inside was information connected to a target named Kang Dong-wook, who was linked to a construction company. She studied the photo of Kang Do-young and quietly noted that he looked very young. Leaning back in her chair, she narrowed her eyes and decided it might be time to contact Kim Ji-ho. She asked her subordinate whether the man in the file could be related to the person Ji-ho had been searching for. The man stood with his hands together and admitted that it was difficult to confirm. He explained that the target could possibly be Ji-ho's friend, but there was still no certainty. A sharp smile slowly spread across the woman's face. She tapped the photo and stated that her instincts told her this was exactly the person they needed.